Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into something deeply uncomfortable, like 14th century linen underwear during a bubonic summer. We're talking about the biggest global reset button in medieval history, the Black Death. And more importantly, how you, yes, you, somehow survive it and help rebuild a broken world from the ashes. Just so we're clear, you probably won't survive this. In fact, you're living in a time where people drop dead faster than you can say, God have mercy. Somewhere between 75 and 200 million people are about to be wiped off the map. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I don't want pity clicks, just plague-era loyalty. Also, tell me, what city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? I love knowing who's drifting off to history in which corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the scent of rot. Not manure, not food, just rot. A few days ago, it was your neighbor. Yesterday, your cousin. Today, someone in your house is coughing blackened blood onto the floorboards, and you already know what comes next. It's 1347, and you live in a bustling port city, maybe Messina, Genoa, or Marseille. The first rats came off the boats last week, but nobody noticed. Trade is everything, and the docks are always full. You're too busy unloading silk, spices, and optimism. But optimism has a short shelf life here. Soon the panic kicks in. Whispers fill the markets, a sickness with no cure. Some say it started in the east, carried by Mongol soldiers or traders. Others swear it's divine punishment, a reckoning from above for your sins, or maybe for eating meat on a Wednesday. Some blame the Jews, the lepers, or even the stars. Everyone's got a theory, and none of them are comforting. You try to stay clean, burn herbs in your home, and avoid strangers. But it's already in your bloodstream, your air, your gods. You see your neighbors locking themselves inside with their families, praying that a good lock can stop a bad death. You also hear about the rich fleeing to their country homes, far from the filth of the cities. You can't afford that. You're staying here with the rats. The day the first mass grave opens is the day it feels real. The graveyard is full. The priests stop coming to funerals. They're either too scared or too dead. You watch bodies pile up like firewood. And soon enough, there's no one left to cry for them. You help carry the dead because someone has to. You burn your clothes afterward, even though you're not sure it'll help. The smell gets into your hair, your skin, your teeth. But you're not dead yet. There's a rumor that some people, just a handful, are immune. Maybe you're one of them. You start eating garlic, drinking vinegar, and sleeping with a cross under your pillow. You try everything. You boil your water, your clothes, your friends' advice. You keep breathing, which is no small victory. And then the ships stop coming. That's when the silence gets loud. The docks close. Trade halts. The city that once roared with shouting merchants and clattering carts now groans under the weight of its own dying. You hear weeping, moaning, sometimes singing, drunken hymns from the flagellants who march through the streets whipping themselves bloody to earn God's forgiveness. They say suffering is the cure. You're not sure you disagree. Food becomes a memory, markets empty. You eat whatever you can find. Hard bread, boiled roots, maybe a pigeon if you're lucky. People barter shoes for soup, secrets for apples. You see nobles begging in rags. Status evaporates fast when no one's left to serve or envy you. And still, every day, more people die. You dream of fire, streets lit with torches, homes burned down just to stop the disease. You see wagons full of corpses wheeled through your town like it's trash day. You wake up and realize it wasn't a dream. Here's a historical fact that'll make your stomach tighten. In cities like Florence and Paris, up to 60% of the population vanishes in just a few years. Think of that. Every street thinned. Every family cut in half or worse. Scholars now estimate that Europe as a whole loses a third to half of its people between 1347 and 1351. Entire villages disappear. Poof. Some are never repopulated again. Now for something fringe and strange, some people believe the plague is spread through miasma, or bad air. So they walk around with long, beaked masks filled with herbs, thinking it'll filter the sickness out. These plague doctors become symbols of both horror and hope. Though in truth, they're often just guys with decent pay and absolutely no clue what they're doing. And here's where debate still rages. What exactly caused the plague to explode so violently? Sure, we know the bacterium Yersinia pestis was involved, and fleas from rats played a role. But modern scholars still argue about how much was airborne, how much was spread by fleas on humans instead of rodents, and how many different strains hit at once. Climate change, war, trade routes, it's a toxic cocktail with no clear starting point. You just know you're trapped in the middle of it. You look around your street and realize you're one of the few left. You stop waiting for someone to fix this. No one's coming. There are no kings left to rule, no priests left to pray, no scholars left to argue. You bury your loved ones, light a candle, and keep walking. Somehow, impossibly, the death rate slows. It isn't victory, it's exhaustion. The disease runs out of people to kill. You survive, not because you're strong or pure or clever, but because chance rolls in your favor. And that's the start of something new, something fragile, a world so broken it might, just might, be rebuilt differently. You stand at the edge of that possibility with a shovel in your hand and soot on your face. It's quiet now, almost too quiet. You step outside and feel the kind of silence that used to come only at night, after the city was long asleep. But now it's midday, and there's no hum of carts, no gossiping voices, no church bells. The streets are still, dust gathering where the foot traffic used to churn. Chickens cluck unattended. A horse chews its reins, tied to a post where its owner hasn't returned in days. And you? You walk alone, past boarded-up houses and doorways marked with red crosses. You try not to look at the ones where the paint is still wet. Everywhere you turn, life has leaked out. It's like the world took a deep breath and never exhaled. Fields lie fallow. That lush countryside that once fed your town now stretches out like a green graveyard. Grain rots in carts that never made it to market. Cattle wander loose. There are no hands left to herd them. You pass a farmhouse and smell something foul. You don't check. You already know. The plague hit everyone, but it hit the poor hardest. They lived close, slept close, and died close. And now, all that closeness is gone. Even your neighbors are ghosts. The ones who fled the cities haven't all come back. Some won't. Entire villages have disappeared without a trace, just empty wells and crumbling stone foundations. It feels like someone erased parts of the map with the back of their hand. You leave the town behind for a while. You need air. You need the illusion of safety. So you walk into the countryside and find a place to sit. And for a strange moment, it's beautiful. The hills roll, the birds sing, as if they missed the memo that humanity nearly blinked out. But it's not peace you're feeling. It's the weight of absence. That's the new plague. Emptiness. There are no markets to visit, no festivals, no weddings. No more communal bread ovens with women laughing over sourdough secrets. You used to dance in the square on feast days. Now, even laughter feels guilty. Still, you notice something strange. Slowly, like weeds breaking through cobblestones, people start to emerge. A man you thought was long gone appears, hauling a bundle of tools. A woman with streaks of gray in her hair starts sweeping the front of a bakery that hasn't baked in months. Children peek from behind doorways. A candle gets lit in a chapel window. One by one, the survivors come crawling out of the wreckage. Not because they're healed, but because they're hungry. You join them. No one is officially in charge anymore. The mayor died in the second wave. The local lord retreated to a mountain castle and hasn't been heard from since. So the remaining townsfolk just do things. Fix what's broken. Fill what's empty. You help board up a house that still smells of death, then tear down another to use the timber. Tools change hands without money. Nobody's keeping score. But one thing becomes clear. The land is suddenly up for grabs. Where before you needed royal permission, or 100 years of serfdom to touch the soil, now it's just there, vacant, waiting. Entire estates have no heirs. Fields are begging to be worked. You, a peasant who once bent the knee and paid 10 kinds of tax just to stay alive, suddenly have choices, and that changes everything. Here's a raw historical fact. Wages shoot up after the plague, not out of kindness, out of necessity. Fewer workers mean labor is scarce. If you can hold a plow or swing a hammer, you're valuable. Some places even pass laws to cap wages, trying to stop this sudden inflation of peasant power. But let's be real. When half the population's dead, who's enforcing anything? In England, they passed something called the Statute of Laborers in 1351, trying to freeze wages and make people return to their old jobs. You can practically hear the surviving workers laughing. You've seen too much, lost too much to go back to begging. So now, you set your own terms. That's the spark. You start noticing that whole families are moving into abandoned homes. They don't ask permission, they just take them. With so much death, inheritance becomes chaotic. If you can claim it and defend it, it's yours. Land, livestock, furniture, things that once passed through generations of noble bloodlines now pass through whoever's left alive and bold enough to grab it. And here's a weird little fringe reality. Some people start living like mini-lords. Former serfs who'd never owned more than the tunic on their backs now dine at oak tables and drink from pewter goblets stolen, or reclaimed, depending on how you look at it, from the dead. There's a strange, almost comedic leveling of the social order. You find yourself in a tavern with someone who used to clean chamber pots, and now they're wearing silk that still smells faintly of perfume. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Not everyone wants this change. Some cling desperately to the old world, trying to glue the broken pieces back into the same shape. The church tells you to be humble, thankful. The nobles, if any are still around, try to reassert their rights. They bark orders, but no one listens. What army are they going to send? Half the soldiers are dead, or have turned farmer themselves. Scholars still debate how fast this transition really was. Did peasants actually rise overnight? Or did it take decades for real change to settle? Some argue the power shifts were slow and patchy, while others believe the Black Death was a fast-track ticket to economic mobility. The answer might be both. It depends on where you lived, who died, and how badly you wanted to live differently. What's clear to you standing in this hollowed-out town is that the rules are being rewritten in real time. And for once, you're holding the pen. You gather what tools you can. You and a few others clear an old field, dig irrigation trenches, and share what seeds you find. The first crop isn't great, but it's yours. You trade a bushel of barley for a wheelbarrow. You swap dried herbs for boots. With the merchants gone, you become the market. And through all this, you find community again. Not the one you lost, but a strange new version of it. You're surrounded by people who saw what you saw, buried who you buried, and still chose to keep going. Survivors, builders, strangers who now feel like kin. There's no feast, no fireworks, just a slow, stubborn return to motion. You take a deep breath, shovel in hand, and step into the field, the past behind you and something raw and uncertain ahead. It starts with the smell again, but not of death this time. Smoke, charcoal. The burn pits have been lit again, but now it's not for heat or blacksmithing. It's for the bodies. Even though the worst wave seems to have passed, the dead keep coming. Just fewer now, more scattered. And someone still has to deal with them. That someone is you. You didn't plan to become a gravedigger, and you definitely didn't train for it. But the priest said you were strong enough, and the undertaker who used to run things, well, he's part of the reason the pile's gotten so high. So you cover your mouth with a rag soaked in vinegar because someone told you it helps, and you join the others dragging what's left of humanity toward the earth. The burial sites are less like cemeteries now and more like pits. Big, wide, hastily dug trenches filled in layers. Bodies, lime, dirt, more bodies. You don't ask names. You don't say prayers. You just keep your head down and shovel. It's hard not to get numb. The first few days are the worst. The smell is sharp and heavy, like old meat cooked in despair. Your stomach clenches, and sometimes you throw up behind a tree. No one laughs. They're all too busy keeping rhythm. Dig, drop, cover. You've seen hands frozen in claw shapes, mouths wide open in silent screams, eyes still wet from whatever took them. But here's the thing. After a while, you stop seeing faces. You start seeing numbers. That's the historical part. Cities like London, Florence, and Avignon recorded thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, of deaths in just a few months. In London alone, records suggest that cemeteries were expanded fivefold. In some places, graveyards are filled with plague layers, distinct geological bands of bones beneath the soil, like sediment from an apocalypse. And what makes it surreal? These sites become communal. Rich or poor, noble or serf, once you're dead, you're dumped in the same pit. For the first time in history, maybe ever, death is the great equalizer. Your social class stops at the edge of the shovel. You try not to think about that as you dig, but you can't help it. You remember the face of your old master, the baron with the jeweled collar. You buried him yesterday between a goat herder and a man who stole onions. No gravestone, no Latin chant, just a broken leg bone sticking out before the next body flopped in. There's a rumor going around that some towns are burning bodies now, not just burying them. Bonfires miles wide, smoke choking the sky. They say it keeps the sickness from lingering. You're not sure if it's true, but you've seen torch lines. People walking solemnly with bodies slung over their shoulders, heading toward flame. One day, you're told to go to the edge of town. There's an old chapel there, no longer used. Behind it, the forest has been cleared. That's the new burn site. You approach it like it's sacred, even though you know it isn't. Ashes mix with the soil. The air tastes bitter. You wonder how long the smell will cling to your skin. You wonder if it ever leaves. Still, even in this horror, people get creative. You meet a man who invented a pulley system to lower corpses into pits without needing 6 people per body. Another swears by certain herbs. He crushes sage, rosemary, and thyme into his gloves, claiming it keeps the spirits at bay. One woman insists that if you sing while digging, the disease won't notice you. You try it once. It feels ridiculous. But you do it again the next day, just in case. Here's the strange fact for tonight. Some grave pits were so large and hurried that entire families were buried alive, accidentally. In their plague-addled stupor, they appeared dead. But later, their skeletons were found in twisted positions, claw marks in the soil above them. A few towns even started prodding corpses with sticks just to be sure. And if they moved, well, welcome back. And the open debate, was this massive rush to bury and burn effective at stopping the plague? Some historians say yes, it helped cut transmission, especially in crowded urban areas. Others argue it was too late by the time the pits were dug. The disease spread faster than the bodies could be disposed of, and the burial rituals were more about psychological survival than actual medical benefit. Either way, people needed something to do with their hands while their minds unraveled. You notice you're getting faster at your job, efficient. That scares you more than the death now. You've stopped crying. You wash your hands every night until they bleed. You burn your clothes weekly, which means you now own basically one outfit. But somehow, you keep waking up. And then, one day, you bury a child. A small one, maybe 5 or 6. And something breaks. You can't do it anymore. You walk away from the pit and don't go back. The priest calls it shirking your holy duty. The town bailiff tells you someone will be punished for your absence. But you don't care. You find an empty house, fix the roof, and stay there for days. You scrub your nails, light a candle, and eat dried peas with your fingers. You don't leave the house until you hear laughter, real, high-pitched laughter from outside. Kids, playing in the street. You thought there were none left? It hits you like a wave. Life is trying to return. Tiny, trembling, stubborn. And it won't do it in the grave pits. It's coming back in games, in stolen apples, in someone shouting your name just to see if you'll answer. You do. You start walking again, past rows of burned-down cottages and empty fields, into what's left of town. Someone's hanging laundry. Someone else is digging a well. There's a man painting over a plague cross on his front door, as if to say, "We made it." And you? You stop at the edge of a trench, now covered in fresh grass, and sit. You don't cry this time. You nod. You know what lies beneath, and you know what needs to rise above. You wake to the sound of church bells, not tolling for the dead this time, but for Mass. Regular, boring, predictable Mass. And that's how you know something has shifted. It's been months, maybe more, since you've heard anything that sounded like normal. The bells clang through the mist like a dare, like a voice whispering, "Come see if it's all still here." You follow the sound, your steps unsure. The church door is half open, and inside the air smells of wax and damp stone. A few candles flicker near the altar. The pews are mostly empty. A priest stands at the front, eyes sunken, robes faded, voice hoarse. But he's there. He's talking. And people like you, are sitting, listening, even mumbling prayers. You sit in the back, not out of humility, but so you can leave if the whole thing starts to feel too fake, too before. Because if there's one thing you've learned through all this, it's that no one had a clue. Not the nobles, not the doctors, and definitely not the clergy. That's the first crack. Before the plague, the church was everything. Birth, death, marriage, confession, taxes, forgiveness. It all flowed through the hands of priests and bishops. God watched you through stained glass windows and Latin sermons. You were terrified of sinning in your sleep. But then the plague came, and it did not care about your rosary. You watched priests drop in the streets. You saw monks abandon their posts. You heard stories of bishops locking themselves inside monasteries while the villagers outside screamed and burned. The very people who promised salvation vanished, or worse, sold it. Here's the historical fact of the hour. The plague absolutely decimated the clergy. In some regions, over half of church officials died. Entire monasteries were wiped out. Cathedrals were locked and left to rot. Priests who stayed were often forced to administer last rites to hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. They cracked, spiritually, mentally, sometimes physically. And the replacement clergy? Not great. With the church desperate for bodies, they lowered standards for new recruits. You get men who can barely read the Bible, suddenly hearing confessions and collecting tithes. Some are corrupt, some are clueless, a few are kind. But the divine mystery? It's got a lot more wine stains now. People start asking dangerous questions. If God let all this happen, what does that mean? Why did the innocent die screaming while the greedy lived in their manors? Why did the Pope hide in Avignon with walls scrubbed in rose water while entire villages collapsed? And then there are the flagellants. You saw them, remember? Marching into town with whips and bloodied backs, chanting and singing like a mobile apocalypse. They believed the plague was a punishment for sin, and they were determined to suffer on behalf of all mankind. At first, they were tolerated, even admired, but eventually, the church turned on them, called them heretics, too radical, too out of control. And maybe they were, but they were also proof that people were losing faith in the old ways, or, at the very least, trying to find new ones. Now here's the fringe bit. Some survivors started blending Christianity with folk traditions, older rituals that had been quietly passed down. You hear of women chanting over herbs in the woods, of men drawing protective circles in chalk around their homes. Saints start appearing that no one had ever heard of. Local legends get added to gospel stories. It's messy, but it works, for now. In fact, a few towns start appointing their own local saints. Ordinary people who died heroically during the plague are suddenly venerated. You see makeshift shrines pop up in corners of villages, candles, flowers, a bit of bone or cloth. The official church disapproves, but the people don't care. They're not looking for doctrine. They're looking for something that showed up when it mattered. You yourself begin to think differently. You still pray, but it's more of a whispered conversation now, not a performance. You light a candle for your mother, not because someone told you to, but because you feel it, tethering you to something. Not heaven, maybe, but memory. And memory is its own kind of sacred now. Meanwhile, the church is trying to pull itself back together. Bishops hold meetings, monasteries reopen, Papal decrees go out trying to explain the plague in theological terms: scene, wrath, redemption. But it all feels too late. You've already seen behind the curtain. Some of the clergy are trying to fix things. You meet a young friar who actually helps clean plague houses and buries the dead with his own hands. He doesn't preach, he just shows up. People trust him, not because of his title, but because of his effort. That's what the future might look like: faith with calluses. There's an open scholarly debate about how deep the church's wounds actually went. Some argue that the plague permanently weakened its grip, paving the way for later revolutions: Protestantism, secularism, science. Others believe the church rebounded well, adjusting its teachings and doubling down on ritual and control. The truth? Probably both. But standing in this half-empty chapel, you can feel the tremor in the foundation. Outside the church, things are shifting too. Pilgrimages become more popular for those who can afford to travel. People desperate for meaning start walking for days, weeks, to see relics, to touch bones of saints, to feel connected again. Some find peace, others just find blisters. You walk to the town's old shrine, a stone cross with a chipped Virgin Mary carved into the base. You kneel beside an old woman lighting incense and whispering names. The list goes on and on. You don't know if she's praying or just remembering. Maybe both. That night, you dream of stained glass melting, of churches turning into gardens, of preachers standing barefoot in the dirt, telling stories instead of giving orders. You wake up with a strange clarity. Maybe you don't need to stop believing. Maybe you just need to believe differently. You're not alone. Others feel it too. They gather not just to worship, but to talk. They debate. They argue. They wonder. You hear someone suggest that maybe knowledge is a kind of salvation too. That education, not just prayer, could be holy. You file that thought away. It feels important. You take one last look at the altar, then step outside into the sunlight. The world didn't end. The sky is still there. So are the trees, the birds, the people beginning to return to life. And faith? Faith is still here too, just not where you left it. It begins with an inheritance you never asked for. You're in the market square, trading wilted greens for salted fish, when a man you barely recognize calls your name. He wears a patchy wool cloak and a look of confusion, like someone carrying news they don't fully believe themselves. They're dead, he tells you, all of them. You're the last. At first, you think he's mistaken. You have uncles, cousins, a whole line of people above you in the family order. But as he lists the names, first your aunt in Montelupo, then your cousin who moved to Bordeaux, then your brother who caught it last spring, you realize the man is right. You're the heir now. To what? You're not entirely sure. But whatever land or debts your family held, they're yours. You walk the 2 days out to the edge of your family's old holdings. You half expect to find it burned down or overtaken by weeds. But the cottage is still standing, crooked and leaning, but intact. The fields are wild, sure, but not gone. There's potential here, a bitter kind of gift, born out of ash and grief. And you're not alone. Across the countryside, a quiet redistribution is underway. Property, livestock, tools, everything left behind by the dead has to go somewhere. And with so few people left to claim it, the rules are bending. Old records are gone, heirs are dead, and the officials who would have sorted all this out have either fled or lie buried in the churchyard. So people are stepping into abandoned farms, lighting hearths that don't belong to them, and saying, "This is mine now." In some places, local lords are too weak to stop it. In others, they're dead themselves, and no one's replacing them. And you do what everyone else is doing. You start planting again. But here's the twist. You're not doing it just for survival now. You're doing it for legacy. Before the plague, you were one of dozens of peasants on someone else's land, working long hours for a lord who maybe remembered your name. Now, you're the one deciding which patch to till, when to harvest, how to store grain for winter. You don't need permission to repair the roof. You don't need to ask before cutting down a tree. This land, overgrown and half wild, is yours in practice, if not by law. And while that's liberating, it's also terrifying. You remember when there were entire families working these plots. children laughing in the fields, 3 generations under one roof. Now it's just you and a goat that won't stop staring. The days are long, the nights are longer. You talk to the wind more than you talk to people. Here's a cold historical truth. The average medieval household lost more than half its members during the Black Death. In many regions, entire hamlets vanished, and larger villages shrank to a fraction of their size. The result? Empty homes, abandoned tools, and a deep, disorienting loneliness for the survivors. But out of that emptiness comes opportunity. You dig deeper into the fields, find new corners of the land your family never worked before. You try planting beans and rye in different soil. You experiment with crop rotation, not because you read it in a book, but because the neighbor who did just left all his notes behind. You repurpose his tools, even his oxen, and hope he won't mind. And here's a fringe detail that might raise an eyebrow. In some places, cats become unexpectedly valuable during this time. The plague was spread partly by fleas, yes, but people begin to notice that homes with more cats seem luckier, less rat-ridden, more intact. So, you find yourself feeding the strays, welcoming them inside. Superstition, maybe. But again, anything that helps, you keep. There's also a slow but steady rise in livestock numbers. Fewer mouths to feed means more grain for animals. More animals mean more meat, wool, and fertilizer. You find yourself raising pigs for the first time. They're noisy and occasionally terrifying, but they thrive. And unlike before, you get to keep most of the profit. If you can find someone to trade with, that is. You travel once a week now to the nearest town, or what's left of it. The market is smaller, quieter, but beginning to pulse with life again. You see people you haven't seen in months, some gaunt, others newly plump from finally having enough to eat. The air is filled with the sound of bartering, the smell of new bread, and always, the slight underlying tension of everyone wondering who might still be carrying the sickness. In town, you hear whispers about new laws. There's talk that the king, or maybe it's the local duke, has ordered that no one can raise wages, that peasants have to go back to their old employers. You laugh when you hear this. Who's going to enforce it? Half the sheriffs are dead, and the ones left alive are too busy working their own land to care if you make a few extra coins selling cheese. But the nobles are panicking. That's the open debate. How much power did the lower classes actually gain after the plague? Some historians argue it was temporary, that the ruling class eventually cracked down. Others say the shift was real and lasting, a seed of revolution planted in a field fertilized by death. For now, you live somewhere in the middle. You still bow to certain people. You still pay some form of tax. But when a noble rides past on horseback, he doesn't look at you with the same indifference. He sees your tools, your livestock, your rough-worn hands. He knows you could walk away and find another empty patch of land if he tries to treat you like dirt. You have options now. He has fewer. And with that leverage, you begin to build. A new roof goes up, using wood you traded for with barley. The hearth is repaired. You even carve a new table from fallen oak. It's uneven and splinters a bit, but it holds your meals, your maps, your thoughts. You sit at it one evening, looking out at the fields you've slowly reclaimed, and realize something unexpected. You're proud. You don't just have land. You've earned it. You've planted it with your grief, watered it with your sweat, and watched it begin to grow again. The soil isn't just dirt anymore. It's a future. You're carrying a sack of grain on your back when the shouting starts. At first, it sounds like another rowdy trade dispute. Two farmers arguing over goat prices, maybe someone accusing someone else of stealing tools. That happens a lot these days. But this is louder, rawer. You set the sack down, wipe the sweat from your forehead, and follow the noise. When you reach the town square, you see them, a dozen or so peasants, red-faced and furious, surrounding a man in a worn velvet doublet. He's got that look, the kind nobles wear when they're shocked to be spoken to like equals. He's trying to read from a rolled-up parchment, something about labor laws and loyalty, but no one's listening. A woman throws a shoe. Someone else spits. The parchment falls to the dirt. It hits you all at once. Something's changed. This isn't just grief anymore. This isn't mourning or survival. This is anger. The woman who threw the shoe, she lost 2 sons and a husband to the plague. Her village was left with 7 people, and she's been holding things together ever since, planting, harvesting, defending the land from thieves. Now the noble has come back, claiming she owes him labor, that the land still belongs to his family, that she's trespassing on what he calls ancestral property. She tells him what he can do with his ancestors. And just like that, the spark catches. The man flees, his guards nowhere in sight, and the crowd disperses, buzzing with adrenaline. You stand in the quiet that follows, feeling something strange bloom in your chest. Not fear, not guilt. Something sharper, something older, a sense that maybe, just maybe, you deserve more than what you've been told your whole life. Across the region, whispers are turning into voices. You hear of towns where the laborers refuse to work for the same wages as before. In one place, the villagers barricade themselves in and declare they'll pay rent only if their fields are protected from bandits. In another, a group of shepherds forms a rotating guard to keep watch while they sleep. No nobles required. This is the beginning of something big. Historically, this is the seed of a wider resistance. In England, it will become the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, an event sparked by economic pressure, wage controls, and a monarchy out of touch with the grim new reality. But right now, in your time and place, it's just a ripple, a local reckoning. You start speaking up more. You ask why the miller still gets to take such a huge cut of your grain. You refuse to kneel when the reeve rides by. You find others who feel the same, and you start talking at the well, during market, around fire pits at night. There's a slow realization that you're not alone in your frustration. And with this newfound boldness comes community. You used to think of your neighbors as just other mouths competing for the same crust of bread. But now, you start to trust them. You trade more generously. You share oxen when it's time to plow. You even help patch a stranger's roof just because it feels right. Survival isn't a solitary game anymore. It's a pact. But it's not all progress. There are consequences. One morning, a group of soldiers arrives, what's left of the Lord's militia. They go door to door demanding names. They take 2 men from the edge of town and drag them away. You never see them again. The message is clear. The old order isn't going down without a fight. And yet, the fear isn't what it used to be. You've already lived through the worst horror imaginable. What's a sword compared to watching your whole family die coughing black blood? Here's a curious historical footnote for you. Many nobles were so weakened by the plague, financially and militarily, that they began leasing land outright instead of enforcing traditional feudal service. They didn't like it, but they had no choice. The peasants had leverage, and many of them knew it. Still, the new system is shaky. Rules vary from village to village. You hear that in one town, peasants are printing crude pamphlets, hand-copied of course, demanding that land be shared more fairly. In another, workers take over an estate and form a kind of council. No more lord, just a group of survivors figuring it out together. It feels revolutionary. It is revolutionary. And here's something weird. Some people start dressing better. It sounds silly, but it's real. With fewer people around, there's more cloth, more dye, more tailors without clients. You trade barley for a tunic made from fine wool, dark green with copper stitching. You put it on one day and catch yourself in a window reflection. You look important. Not a serf, not a beggar, just a person with worth. Clothing becomes a silent protest. The rich complain about it, of course. There are actual laws passed trying to regulate what peasants can wear. Sumptuary laws, they're called. They want the old hierarchy back, even if it's only visible in the color of your sleeves. But you're not going back. Here's the scholarly debate. Did the Black Death directly cause the end of feudalism? Some historians say yes. It cracked the system and let people climb out of their designated roles. Others argue that feudalism was already shifting, and the plague just sped things up. Either way, you're standing in the wreckage of the old world, and you can see the shape of something new forming. Not a utopia, nothing so clean, but something more flexible, more human. You keep farming your land. You keep speaking your mind. You keep watching the road for signs of trouble, but also for signs of change. One day, a rider passes through town with a scroll nailed to a stick. It promises tax reform, wage protection, maybe even land rights. You scoff at first. Words on paper don't mean much. But then you remember, a few years ago, no one would have even bothered trying to convince you with words. The fight isn't over, but it has begun. You take up your sack of grain, sling it over your shoulder, and walk home through fields you no longer call borrowed. Behind you, the market is buzzing with conversation. Ahead, your house stands sturdy, if crooked. You pass the neighbor's boy chasing a goose, a young couple sowing seeds, and two elders arguing about when to hold the next village meeting. It's not revolution with fire and banners. It's dirt under fingernails and tired backs and whispered meetings in the dark. But it's real, and you're part of it. You dig in your heels, plant your next row of beans, and think, not for the first time, that maybe, just maybe, this broken world still has a chance to grow something new. You're coughing again, not badly, just enough to make you pause mid-step. You hold your breath, tilt your head to listen for the whisper of doom riding on your lungs, but it passes. Just dust. Just the tail end of summer stirring up old hay and soot. Still, the memory is fresh, and every little sneeze or fever makes your heart climb into your throat. You're not the only one. Everyone jumps now when someone sneezes too loudly in the wrong place. So naturally, you start searching for cures. Not just praying this time, not just walking in circles with candles. You want something, anything, that makes the world feel controllable again. And because doctors were mostly decorative before the plague, you and the rest of the world are now deep into the era of do-it-yourself medicine. Let's be honest, it's weird out here. You wake up to the sound of a street vendor hawking vinegar-soaked rags for tying around your ankles. He swears they ward off the plague. Another man is offering dried toad powder, guaranteed to balance your inner humors. A woman you once saw chase chickens is now calling herself a herbal mystic, selling onion poultices for fevers and honey compresses for boils. You try most of it, because why not? You smear crushed garlic on your chest one night when your neighbor starts coughing through the wall. You drink boiled dandelion root mixed with ash from a saint's burned sermon. It tastes like sin. You even buy a charm from a passing merchant, a pewter coin engraved with something that might be Latin or just wishful gibberish, and wear it around your neck. It does nothing, but you feel safer with it on. And then, of course, there are the doctors, if you can even call them that. They start showing up again, drawn by gold or glory, or maybe just the fact that there's no competition left. They walk through towns in those long, black robes, faces hidden behind those now iconic beaked masks. The beaks are stuffed with herbs, lavender, mint, cloves, and they claim it protects them from bad air. Miasma, they call it. The air's corrupted, poisoned by rot and sin. Here's your historical fact. Those creepy plague masks weren't just aesthetic. They were part of a genuine medical theory. Miasma theory had been popular since ancient Greece, and during the plague, it resurged in full force. People believed that disease floated in invisible clouds of filth, and so the nose beaks became proto-air filters. The doctors also carry long sticks, not for walking, but for poking the sick from a safe distance. You watch one prod an old man gently in the side to see if he's still breathing. The man isn't. The doctor sighs, scratches something on a scroll, and moves on without ever getting closer than a goat's length away. But medicine isn't entirely hopeless. There are a few healers, real ones, scattered across the region. Women mostly, midwives, herbalists, widows with calloused hands and stubborn eyes. They don't wear masks or chant in Latin. They boil willow bark for pain. They clean wounds with wine. They insist you eat onions, rest, and radically bathe. And you know what? Sometimes it works. You visit one such woman after a particularly rough week working in the fields, leaves you with swollen joints and a fever. Her cottage smells like thyme and cat pee, and she speaks in riddles, but her salve soothes the ache in your legs, and the tea she gives you actually makes you sleep through the night. When you return days later to thank her, she shrugs and says, "It's all just guessing, lad." But clean water and good sleep never killed anyone. Here's the fringe detail. Some people believe the stars are to blame. Astrologers published charts showing that when Saturn and Jupiter aligned in 1345, they disturbed the air, causing the plague. You hear arguments in the tavern about whether the planets will line up again soon. One man swears Mercury has a grudge against your village. And then comes the big debate. What is sickness, really? You hear it everywhere now. Is it punishment from God? A natural force? A test? A lesson? Or is it just random? This is the scariest theory of all. If the world is random, then no amount of garlic or prayer can save you. But if the world is not random, well, that means someone or something wanted this to happen. Either way, it's hard to sleep. Some scholars begin writing again. The ones who survived start gathering old texts, copying them by hand, debating the cause of death in back rooms of churches and manor houses. You hear about men arguing for days over how many bodily humors exist and which one needs to be bled out first. You try to follow the logic once. You end up more confused than when you started. But quietly, the seeds of modern medicine are being planted, slowly, painfully. One town near you opens what they call a plague house, a small building on the edge of the woods where the sick can go voluntarily to either recover or die. No one forces them, but it's a way to keep the rest of the town safer. You visit once to bring supplies and find it strangely peaceful, quiet. The sick aren't screaming, they're sleeping, being fed, cleaned. It feels like dignity. You wonder what it would take to build something like that in your own village. Maybe if everyone gave a little, some stone, some time, some cloth, you could make a place like that yourselves, not out of fear, but out of respect. So, you bring it up at the next meeting around the well, people hesitate, resources are still tight, but eventually someone offers land, someone else has timber, you offer your hands, it begins. And with that, something starts to shift in your mind. You stop thinking of medicine as just superstition and start seeing it as action. Practical, messy, hopeful. It's not just garlic and gods anymore. It's people trying, in whatever way they can. One evening, you sit beside a neighbor who's got a fever. You wash his face with cool water, light a candle, and hum the same tune your mother used to hum when you were sick. You're not a doctor. You're not even sure you're helping, but you're there. And sometimes being there is the only cure anyone has. The screaming starts before dawn. It slices through the village like a knife through bread. Sharp, sudden, unmistakably human. You sit up, heart pounding, not sure if it's another plague death or just someone having one of those dreams everyone has now, the kind where the walls close in and the air smells like ash. But this is different, real. You pull on your boots and step outside. Half the village is already gathered in front of old Maillard's house. He's kneeling in the mud, blood on his hands, shouting over and over, "She cursed us! She cursed my son." His eyes are wide and wet, the kind of grief that curdles into rage if you let it sit too long. Two men hold back his arms. A third is pointing toward a figure standing against the stone wall, unmoving, Jean. You know her. Everyone does. She's old, sharp-tongued, lives near the woods, and has more jars of strange-smelling herbs than teeth. She helped you once with a sore tooth, tied a knot of clove and mint in linen, told you to bite it until the pain was scared away. It worked. Probably. You were too desperate to argue. But now, Maillard's son is dead. Plague, fever, something ugly and fast. And Jean is the nearest suspicious thing. She doesn't cry. She doesn't beg. She stands there with arms crossed, face like carved bark. "I warned him," she says quietly. "He drank from the river after the sheep died in it." That's true. Everyone remembers the sheep floating belly up a week ago. But truth doesn't matter right now. Grief has no appetite for facts. The shouting turns ugly. People start listing everything odd she's ever done. Didn't her cat stare too long at someone's baby? Didn't her garden bloom too early that one spring? Didn't she once say that storms were coming and then they did? Someone throws a rock. That's when you realize this isn't going to stop on its own. You step forward, maybe foolishly, and say what needs saying. That people are dying from bad water, from rot, from the same invisible sickness that took your sister. That blaming a woman with jars and a strong voice won't change anything. You expect them to ignore you. Maybe they will. But someone else nods. Another mutters, "He did drink from the river." Jean is spared, this time. But you feel the tremor beneath your feet. That old fear is mutating. It's not just death people fear anymore. It's uncertainty, powerlessness. And nothing says powerless like a plague you can't see and a God who won't answer. So people start looking for someone to blame. And women like Jean, they're easy targets. Here's the historical fact. During and after the Black Death, witch hunts began to rise across Europe. Not all at once, not everywhere, but the seeds were planted in this period of panic and suspicion. The full-scale witch mania would bloom in later centuries, but the roots are right here, in terrified towns with too many corpses and too few explanations. You begin to notice it everywhere. In one village, a Jewish merchant is accused of poisoning the well. He's beaten, chained, and taken away. You never hear what happened after. In another town, a group of travelers is denied entry and pelted with stones. Rumors spread that they carry death in their pockets. Even lepers, once treated with a strange kind of holy pity, are suddenly attacked, their homes burned. And here's something truly grim and fringe. In some areas, entire communities of minorities were wiped out, often burned alive in public squares. People cheered, thinking they were cleansing the town. Later, when nothing changed and the plague kept killing, those same people just picked new targets. You sit with that. The truth is, no one really understands what's happening. The best minds of the age are arguing about star alignments and foul air, while villagers are turning on anyone who doesn't fit the mold of safe. And in the absence of real cures, panic becomes a kind of social fever, one that spreads faster than the plague itself. But you also see flickers of resistance. A few towns begin protecting their healers. You hear about a village that formed a watch around an old midwife, guarding her day and night after she helped deliver a baby during the worst of the plague. In another, a local priest actually preaches against scapegoating, says that turning on each other will only bring more ruin. There's a growing divide now, not just between rich and poor, healthy and sick, but between those who want to build and those who want to burn. You have to choose where you stand. One evening, you visit Jean again. You bring her salt and dried apples. She pretends not to be grateful, but she lets you sit by the fire. Her cottage is cluttered and strange, but warm. She tells you stories while grinding herbs, some old, some made up on the spot. You ask her if she believes in curses. She laughs. "Of course," she says, "but not the kind that fly from lips, the kind that get into people's hearts. Fear, anger, small minds with too much power." That night, you dream of fire again, but this time it's not the fever pits. It's torches, mob torches. You wake with a heaviness in your chest. This world, fragile and aching as it is, can still break even further if people start turning on each other. And it's starting. You can feel it. In the suspicious looks, in the whispered rumors, in the silence that follows someone's name being said too softly, too often. Here's the scholarly debate for this chapter. Historians still argue whether the plague era directly caused the explosion of witch hunts later on, or if those were fueled by separate forces: religious reform, economic tension, political instability. But most agree the plague cracked open the door. It showed how quickly people would blame the powerless when the powerful failed to protect them. You finish repairing your fence the next day, hands splintered and sore, and wonder how much longer reason can hold. Because the real plague now? It might be fear, it might be hatred, and if it spreads too far, there won't be any medicine strong enough to cure it. There's a knock at the door one morning, soft, deliberate, like someone trying not to wake the dead. You pause mid-slice with a piece of hard cheese and look up from your chipped table. Visitors are rare these days. Most people keep to their circles, wary of sickness, gossip, or worse. You open the door slowly. It's Brother Arno. He looks thinner than you remember, more bone than monk now, but still dressed in his threadbare robes, a wooden cross slung around his neck on a fraying cord. His sandals are crusted in road dust, and there's a smell to him. Not rot, thankfully, just the musk of someone who's been walking for days without stopping. He smiles, weak but warm. You let him in. He drinks the cider you offer like a man who's forgotten what sweetness is. I've been walking from village to village, he says after a long silence, trying to help, trying to remind people that the church is still here. You want to believe him? You really do. But after everything, after the prayers that went unanswered, the churches that closed their doors, the priests who vanished during the worst of it, this feels like too little, too late. You remember watching your neighbor's family burn in a pyre while the bell tower stayed silent? And now they send you a traveler with a wooden cross and a good heart? Still, you nod, because he's here. And that counts for something. He tells you what you already know, that faith is fraying, that some clergy are trying to rebuild trust, walking roads, giving last rites, comforting the dying, that others are growing rich, selling indulgences, using the chaos to amass land and gold, that for every priest living in humility, there's another hiding behind walls while villagers starve. You've seen both kinds, so has Brother Arno. There's talk of reformation, he whispers. Even from within, quiet voices but growing louder, you raise an eyebrow. Reform? From the inside? It sounds like fixing a wagon that's already rolled off a cliff, but he explains. Some monks are writing again, arguing for a return to simpler times. No gold, no hierarchy, just prayer, service, community. He says some parishes have begun hosting sermons in the open fields, under trees, away from stained glass and velvet pulpits. Because God, they say, doesn't live in stone walls. Here's your historical fact. The Black Death hit the Catholic Church hard, not just in lives but in legitimacy. In many parts of Europe, clerical absenteeism became rampant, and the credibility of religious institutions sank. The plague exposed cracks that reformers would later split wide open, leading, eventually, to the Protestant Reformation in the next century. And here's the weird fringe detail. In some regions, unofficial lay preachers start popping up. Just regular folks who feel compelled to speak, to guide, to stand up in front of their neighbors and say, "This is what I think God wants from us." Some are harmless, some are brilliant, some are dangerously convincing, but none are ordained, and that terrifies the higher-ups. You ask Arnaud if he approves of this. He doesn't answer right away. Finally, he says, if they're leading people toward kindness, toward care, maybe that's enough. It's a quiet rebellion, but a rebellion nonetheless. You begin to notice it more and more. The local chapel no longer demands coin for every candle lit. The priest lets people gather inside to sleep during storms, something that would have once been unthinkable. A young girl reads scripture aloud in the square, and no one tells her to stop. And yet, resistance grows alongside it. One afternoon, a letter arrives nailed to the door of the chapel, a decree from the bishop. It warns against heresy, denounces unlicensed preaching, and demands that all worship be done under the supervision of official clergy. It threatens excommunication to those who defy it. You and others read it aloud and laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's so out of step with reality. They're clinging to rules made for a world that doesn't exist anymore. But some people still believe, fiercely. There's a merchant in town who begins tithing double, convinced the plague was punishment for spiritual laxity. He scolds others for attending outdoor sermons. He clutches his rosary like a weapon, eyes darting for signs of rebellion. Others fall into flagellant fervor again, whipping themselves in the streets, crying out for divine mercy. You watch, unsure whether to pity them or fear them. And then there's you, caught in the middle like everyone else. You still believe in something. You still light candles. You still mutter prayers in the dark when someone gets sick. But it doesn't feel the same. God, if he's still watching, feels farther away, more silent, or maybe just tired. That's the open debate. Did the plague drive people away from religion, or deepen their need for it? Historians can't agree. For every case of a town turning secular, there's another where faith surged, reshaped by trauma. Maybe both are true. Maybe belief didn't die, it just evolved. You start attending the open-air sermons. They're simple. No hymns, no robes, just a man or woman standing with a book or a memory, sharing stories of mercy, of patience, of community. People listen, some cry, others just sit quietly, glad for the human closeness. It feels more honest than anything you've heard in years. One day, Arnaud leads one himself. He doesn't preach, he just tells the story of a village that built its own chapel from scratch. No permission, no architects, just stones gathered and stacked, one at a time, until the roof could hold off the rain. He says, maybe that's what God wants from us now. Not cathedrals, not titles, just effort. The crowd is silent, not out of fear, but because, for a moment, everyone believes him. You walk home under a bruised sky, thinking about that chapel made of stone and sweat. You don't know what will become of the church, the doctrine, the hierarchy. You don't know if Rome will ever listen to the voices rising from muddy fields and broken villages. But you do know this. People are finding faith again, not through fear, but through rebuilding. Maybe that's the miracle, not divine intervention, not angels swooping down to save you, but people, broken and tired, helping each other back to their feet, one kindness at a time. You get fined for quitting your job. No, really. It happens quietly, like a rat chewing through the bottom of a grain sack. Just a slip of parchment posted on the town notice board, stamped with some noble's seal that no one recognizes anymore. It says all workers must return to their former positions. It says wages must be what they were before the pestilence. It says anyone caught refusing a reasonable offer of work will be punished. It says a lot of things. You stand there reading it with a handful of other villagers, and you all do the same thing, scoff. There's no way they're serious, but they are. And just like that, the ruling class tries to rewind time. The thing is, they noticed. The nobles, the landowners, the bishops with gold-threaded cloaks. They saw you and your neighbors asking for more money, saw laborers abandoning their posts and negotiating their worth, saw people leaving cities to start fresh on free land, and it terrified them. So now they're trying to pretend the plague didn't shift the ground beneath their feet. Too bad the ground isn't playing along. Here's your historical fact. In 1351, England passed the Statute of Laborers, an actual law that attempted to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and bind workers to their employers. Other parts of Europe passed similar laws, all aimed at one thing: controlling the workforce, reasserting the old order, putting the lid back on the pot that's very much boiling over. But enforcement? That's the tricky part. The local bailiff, what's left of him, starts visiting farms again, trying to remind people that they owe labor to their lords. He keeps a list, wears a rusty badge. But you notice something. No one's scared of him anymore. Not really. He has no guards, no horses, and when he shows up at the field one morning to drag a boy back to his rightful master, 4 women confront him with rakes and don't blink when he threatens them. He leaves, quietly. No arrests, no whippings. Still, the pressure mounts. Lords send letters demanding tribute. They want more grain, more wool, more tax. You get one such letter, official-looking, signed with a broken wax seal, and you wipe your hands on it before tossing it into the hearth. You've been working your patch of land for over a year now. No one helped you build the fence. No one fed you through the winter. They have no claim to anything. But the fight isn't just about land or money anymore. It's about agency. And for the first time in your life, you feel like you have some. You choose where you work. You choose what to grow, what to trade. You choose who to help and who to walk away from. People used to be born into their roles like fish into rivers, serf, lord, merchant, priest. But now, rivers are drying up. New paths are forming. You see it most clearly in the market. Before, the stalls were divided by guild, by license, by lineage. Now, they're a glorious mess. A girl selling pies next to a butcher who just learned how to salt meat. A mason trading stones for jars of honey. A monk hawking ink and handwritten prayers. People make things now not because they were born into a trade, but because they can. And here's a wonderfully weird fringe fact. Some towns begin to document these changes with makeshift contracts, handwritten agreements between laborers and employers, with negotiated wages and terms. It's not yet law, but it's a taste of something modern. A proto-labor movement, bubbling out of plague-struck soil. Of course, not everyone's happy about this. You hear of one estate where the Lord builds a stockade and jails workers who refuse his terms. In another, a merchant raises prices on essentials, trying to exploit the rebuilding frenzy, and gets run out of town by people banging pots and pans. There's tension everywhere, but also experimentation. You hear of a village that elects its own overseer, not a noble or priest, but a farmer who lost 3 sons and still kept the fields alive. They hold regular meetings, distribute tasks, pool resources. You visit once, curious, and find something that feels half like a commune, half like a miracle. One evening, you sit with your neighbors around a fire, bread baking in the coals, and someone says it plainly, "We didn't survive just to go back." Heads nod, no argument. The silence that follows is thick with memory of who's gone, of what's lost, but also of what's being built. Still, the system isn't gone, just limping. Some lords still have power, especially those who kept their households intact. They send knights to enforce their will. They raise taxes again. They force tenants to sign contracts under threat. And if the harvest fails, well, they'll blame the workers, not the weather. That's the scholarly debate. Did these post-plague labor laws actually work? Some historians argue they were widely ignored or selectively enforced, acting more like threats than real rules. Others claim they shaped the next century of social policy, laying the groundwork for centralized control. The truth is likely somewhere in between. But on the ground where you live, it feels like the rules are breaking faster than they're being written. And through it all, your daily life keeps moving. You plant, you mend your roof, you trade a jar of honey for a woolen scarf that's far too fancy for field work, but makes you feel like a king when you wear it. You help a neighbor rebuild her cart. You host a traveler who speaks 5 languages and claims to have seen Constantinople. Your world is bigger now, even as the lords try to shrink it back down to fit their ledgers. You don't know what the next season will bring. Another wave of plague? Another letter threatening punishment? Maybe. But you do know that you've tasted freedom, and it's in your bones now, like fire, like hunger, like faith. And if they think they can stuff that back into a scroll and nail it to a door, let them try. You wake up to birdsong. That alone is a miracle. For so long, mornings were marked by coughing, screaming, or nothing at all. Just the eerie, heavy silence of absence. But now, there are birds. Real birds, loud and chaotic and absolutely disinterested in the drama of human suffering. You listen for a while before getting up, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and stepping outside. The farm is still there. Your farm, the one you inherited from death, not birth. The roof still leaks when it rains, and half the fence is more wish than structure, but it's yours. You walk past your little field, sprouting barley this season, past the goats, who eye you like they're planning a mutiny, and down to the orchard you've started clearing. The orchard wasn't always there. It was once a mess of brambles and dead limbs. Probably hadn't been tended since before the plague. But when you first swung your axe into one of the rotting trees, it felt like cutting into the past. Tough, stubborn, but hollow. Now new saplings are in the ground. Apples, maybe pears. If the cuttings take, you don't know if they'll bear fruit. But planting something that won't feed you for years? That's what hope looks like. And that's your real job now. Not just surviving, but rebuilding. The village is rebuilding too, slowly, unevenly, like someone sewing together a quilt with pieces that don't quite match. New people have moved in, widows from other towns, younger sons with nowhere to go, a quiet man who doesn't say where he's from but builds fences like a magician. The village council, yes, there's a council now, tries to keep things fair. You meet once a month in the old alehouse, now half tavern, half town hall, with scrolls tacked to the walls and a goat that keeps sneaking inside. This is where decisions get made. Who gets which patch of land, how to share the well when the rains don't come, when to send people out for salt, for cloth, for iron. It's not perfect. Arguments happen. One man tried to sneak extra grain from the communal store and got caught. But instead of throwing him in a ditch or dragging him before some far-off baron, the council voted to have him fix the road as penance. He did it. Badly, but he did it. That's the difference now. The power is here. Before the plague, you had no say in anything. You paid what was demanded, worked where you were told, and died in a place someone else picked for you. Now, you're asked what you think. You get a vote. You argue. You laugh. You sit at a table with people who once wouldn't have looked you in the eye. And maybe the strangest part? You've become one of the people they ask for help. It started with a tool, a simple wooden plow you carved from scrap and ironed at the forge. Someone saw it, asked to borrow it, then someone else asked you to help repair a beam. Now, people come to you when something's broken, or stuck, or misaligned. You don't call yourself a carpenter, or a builder, or anything really, but your hands know how to shape things, and that means something now. You're not the only one stepping into a new role. The blacksmith's daughter is running the forge now, arms like tree trunks, and a temper to match. The miller's widow oversees grain distribution and makes better numbers than her husband ever did. And that one strange man who always kept bees? He's now organizing the trade routes of all things. Apparently bees teach you a thing or two about logistics. There's still fear, always. You hear of towns that didn't recover, villages that fell into chaos, were swallowed by bandits, or simply disappeared into the woods. There's always a chance the plague returns. There's always the next disaster on the horizon. But for now, people are working, living, laughing again, even if cautiously. Here's your historical fact. Many survivors of the Black Death returned to the land, not just out of necessity, but because land meant security. Farming became the foundation of renewal. In areas where feudalism loosened, former serfs became landowners, smallholders, or tenant farmers with more freedom than ever before. The countryside became a patchwork of rebirth. And here's a curious little fringe fact. Some families actually began tracking land through oral history, passing down not titles or deeds, but stories. You hear one from your neighbor, how her grandfather fought off a wolf in the southern field, how her mother planted the first rose bush near the well. You realize, as she tells it, that these stories are the claim, memory as ownership. You start doing it too. You walk your land and speak to it out loud. This is where I buried the ox. That's the row that survived the drought. Here's the corner where I first saw frost in May. It's like you're stitching yourself into the dirt, becoming part of it in return. There's debate in the wider world about what land means now. Scholars write dusty letters to each other wondering, is ownership still tied to noble blood? Or to effort? To survival? It's an open question. No one agrees. You don't care. All you know is this. You've earned this place. You plant vegetables in straight lines. You fix the roof again. You help rebuild the church bell tower, even though you don't particularly care for the sermons. You do it because it matters to someone. Because putting up something that fell down feels like magic, like cheating death. And at night, when the wind whistles through the trees you planted, you lie in bed and let yourself imagine a future. Not just for you, but for others. Children, maybe. A family. You haven't allowed yourself to hope like that in a long time. But now the land is growing again. And so are you. You find the door half buried under a pile of stone and ivy. It's tucked behind what used to be the old tailor's workshop, nearly hidden beneath decades of neglect. At first, you think it's just another collapsed cellar. There are plenty of those scattered around town, hollow ruins from a time before the plague. But as you pull the ivy away, fingers scratched and dusty, you spot something carved into the wood, a symbol, 2 hands gripping a hammer. You've seen it before. It's a guild mark. You call over Thomas, the smith's apprentice. He takes one look, grins, and starts clearing rubble without asking questions. An hour later, you're both staring into the dark entrance of an old guild hall, long abandoned, but mostly intact. The air smells like soot, cobwebs, and rusted memory. You step inside. Inside are broken benches, splintered tools, half-collapsed shelving, and potential. Glorious potential. Because here's the thing. The guilds are coming back. Not the bloated, bureaucratic ones from the old days, the ones stuffed with rules and locked doors. No, these are leaner, scrappier, born out of survival and rebuilt from necessity. You helped form one last month, actually, not because someone told you to, but because your little village was full of people with new skills and no structure. It started when Mare, the stonemason's niece, wanted to teach her neighbor's sons how to cut tile. Then the weaver offered spinning lessons in exchange for firewood. Then the beekeeper offered to show others how to render wax. Pretty soon, there were gatherings, unofficial meetings, tools being shared, apprentices being chosen. You didn't call it a guild at first, but that's what it became. Now you're helping others do the same. Tomas and you spend the next few days clearing out the hall, fixing what you can. Others join. Someone brings oil lamps. Someone else patches the windows. You find a stash of old records beneath a broken floorboard, parchments listing names, dates, supply counts from 2 decades ago. The handwriting is elegant, deliberate. You whisper some of the names aloud, wondering which ghosts are listening. By the end of the week, the place is alive again. You call your group the Hammer Circle. It sounds dramatic, but it's just 12 people who know how to make things and are tired of doing it alone. You meet twice a month. You share what you've learned, trade what you've made, and, most importantly, you protect each other. Because not everyone loves this new spirit of cooperation. There are whispers again. Old landowners watching from their crumbling manors, not thrilled that the peasants have gotten creative. A tax collector rides through one day and scoffs when you show him the guild ledger. Craft belongs to cities, he mutters, not the likes of you. But he doesn't stop you. He can't. Too few of them. Too many of you. Here's your historical fact. After the Black Death, guilds evolved, some collapsing under lost membership, others transforming to meet new labor demands. In many regions, rural guilds or craft cooperatives began to form, challenging the dominance of urban guilds and creating entirely new networks of artisans and tradespeople. And here's your fringe fact. In some towns, guilds began offering burial insurance and mutual aid, tiny, early versions of social safety nets. You hear about a town where the Tanners Guild bought a cow for a widow after her husband died. Another group pays for medicine when one of their members falls ill. You write these ideas down. You might try them here. The best part of the guild, though? The learning. You're no master of anything, really. But since joining, you've learned how to mend shoes, sharpen blades, even dye cloth with crushed berries. One woman teaches you how to make ink from oak galls. Another shows you how to shape candle molds. Every week, someone knows something you don't, and they're willing to teach. This is the opposite of how things used to be. Back then, knowledge was hoarded like gold. Masters protected their secrets. Apprentices were bound for years before being trusted with the simplest tricks. But now the world is different. The gatekeepers are gone. The doors are wide open. One evening, after everyone's left the guild hall, you stay behind and sit near the hearth. There's a draft through the north wall, and the roof still leaks in one corner, but the place feels sacred. Not religious, just meaningful. Like a promise made to the living by the dead. You think of your father, who worked his whole life without ever choosing how. You think of your sister, who died before she could ever pick up a trade. You think of the boy you were before the plague, and the person you are now, seated here, surrounded by the tools of your own making. There's an open debate among scholars about whether the rise of these post-plague guilds contributed to the early stirrings of capitalism, or whether they represented a middle path, a more communal model of trade and mutual reliance. Maybe it doesn't matter. For you, the difference is this. You're no longer just a worker. You're a participant, a creator. You get up, hang your apron on the wall, and step out into the cool night air. The streets are quiet. A few lamps flicker in windows. Somewhere down the road, someone is singing, a low, soft song about spring planting. You smile. You've heard worse. Tomorrow, you'll help Mare with her stone tiles. The day after, you'll trade wax with the weaver. Eventually, you'll teach someone else to make that bent handle rake that's somehow become your specialty. You're not rich, not powerful, but you belong to something. And in this strange, stitched-together world, that's worth more than gold. You glance back at the guild hall before walking home. its windows glowing like fireflies in the dark. It's not just a building anymore, it's a blueprint. You're standing in the middle of a construction site that used to be a church. Or maybe it still is. Hard to say when the roof is gone, the windows are boarded up, and there's a goat casually chewing weeds near what used to be the pulpit. All that's left of the original structure is a single wall, scorched at the edges, with half a fresco peeling away like skin. You and the others are rebuilding it, stone by stone, not because anyone asked you to, but because it matters. Not the sermons, maybe, not the Latin chants or the gold leaf reliquaries, but the space. The place to gather, to hold weddings and funerals, to share news and offer warmth when the world grows cold again. The first time you lift a beam into place, it nearly crushes you. That's when you realize rebuilding isn't just work. It's muscle and math. It's coordination and timing. It's hope measured in wood and limestone. And there are a lot of opinions involved. The widow coordinating the volunteers insists on wider windows. We need light now, not shadows, she says. The stonemason wants to add a sloped roof to keep the snow from caving it in again. A boy sketches out pointed arches in the dirt, something he saw in another town that lets the ceiling float like a cloud. You don't know where he learned that, but you like it. So you build something new. It's still a church, still sacred, but it's airier, brighter. You carve little sunbursts into the doorframe, just for fun. Someone paints vines along the interior walls, even though it'll be months before the first service is held. One morning, a cart rolls in from 3 towns away, carrying stained glass panels salvaged from a ruined abbey. The colors catch the light in strange, beautiful ways. You stand in the doorway and feel something shift in your chest. This doesn't feel like a return to the past. It feels like possibility. Here's your historical fact. After the Black Death, architecture began to change. Not all at once, not everywhere, but the old Gothic obsession with overwhelming verticality started to give way to more practical, more human-centered designs. In some places, churches were rebuilt with wider aisles, lower ceilings, and more windows. Towns that couldn't afford ornate cathedrals began to favor simpler chapels. Structures built to serve, not intimidate. And it wasn't just churches. Homes changed too. You help a friend raise a new roof on his cottage, and he adds an extra room, not for storage, but for his books. Books, like he expects there'll be time to read now. Another neighbor adds a second hearth. People start thinking about comfort, not just shelter. It's a weird new world, where peasants debate chimney placement and argue about whether a door should face east to catch the sunrise. These are not the conversations your parents had. Even town centers are shifting. You visit one that burned nearly to the ground during the worst of the plague. Now, the market square is being rebuilt with wider paths, space for carts to turn, even a covered stall for the butcher to keep flies off the meat. Someone's planted a tree in the middle, a pear tree of all things. When you ask why, the mayor shrugs and says, shade and fruit, if we're lucky. It's not just practical, it's symbolic. There's a sense now that if something's worth rebuilding, it should be better than before, not just restored, improved. There's a fringe fact for you. Some towns began building plague chapels, small sanctuaries specifically dedicated to those lost in the Great Dying. They weren't just for mourning. They were spaces to remember, to promise. You hear of one chapel with murals that show the dead dancing alongside the living, a strange, hopeful image. You think of adding something like that to your own town's church. A little reminder that survival doesn't mean forgetting. Of course, not everyone agrees. There are still those who cling to the old forms, who think rebuilding should mean exact rebuilding. We must honor tradition, they say. They want the same arches, the same stone, the same high ceilings meant to make you feel small before God. You understand the instinct. There's comfort in sameness, but sameness is gone now. That's the open debate among scholars, even now. How much of the post-plague rebuilding was truly innovative, and how much was just desperation shaping design? Did people make changes because they wanted to, or because they had no choice? Did they evolve, or simply adapt? You think about that while helping to design a new granary. The old one was too small, rat-infested, terrible ventilation. So now, you and two others are drawing plans in the dirt for a structure with raised flooring and slatted walls to keep the grain dry and the mice out. It's not a castle, but it'll feed people. One afternoon, a traveler stops by. He's an architect, or at least he says he is. He carries rolls of parchment under his arm and speaks with a strange accent. He talks about symmetry, about courtyards and public fountains, about buildings that invite you in instead of towering over you. It sounds ridiculous. It also sounds amazing. He stays for 2 days and sketches a fountain in the square. No one needs a fountain, but they build it anyway. Because maybe now it's okay to want more than need. Maybe beauty matters again. You start to see architecture as a kind of language. Every beam, every stone, every window placement says something. And right now, what people are saying is, we're still here, and we're not afraid to build again. Even the materials are different. Some of the stone is salvaged from ruins, yes, but there's also wood from fresh trees, brick from new kilns. You smell pine sap on the beams and realize, for the first time in years, that not everything you touch is haunted. One day, a girl brings you a flower, just a wild violet she found near the river. She tucks it into a crack in the church wall. When you raise an eyebrow, she says, "It needed color." You don't disagree. When the new chapel finally opens, it's not with trumpets or incense or even a priest. It's with music. Just a few people playing hand drums and flutes, a girl singing something that sounds like a lullaby. Everyone sits on benches they built themselves. You recognize every face. No one is wearing gold. No one gives a sermon. It's perfect. You walk home afterward, the sky tinged with purple and gold, and pass by the square. The fountain's running. Children are throwing pebbles in and making wishes. You don't hear what they wish for. You make your own. That this world, broken and bruised, will hold. That the walls will stay up. That people will keep choosing light and space and color, even after all they've been through. You look up at the sky, at the stars blinking back to life, and you believe it might. You're at a wedding, and it's completely unhinged. Not in the sense that people are falling over drunk, though yes, that's happening too, but in the sense that it's loud, chaotic, joyous, and impossibly alive. It's like the whole village forgot how to behave properly, and remembered, all at once, how to celebrate being human. Children are shrieking as they chase geese through the field. Someone's trying to play a lute that's missing 2 strings. And the bride? She's wearing a red tunic instead of the traditional white, laughing as she pours ale down her groom's shirt. You didn't even know they were courting. But these days, people don't wait. Why would they? Life is fast now, compressed. The old customs, the years-long courtships, the dowries negotiated over parchment and pretension, those are luxuries for a world that had time to spare. And your world? Your world almost ended. So people are choosing each other quickly, sometimes recklessly, with a kind of fierce urgency that's hard to explain to anyone who didn't bury half their village. You sit near the fire, sipping something sweet and warm, and watch as another couple sneaks off behind the barn. You know what they're doing. Everyone does. No one cares. There are going to be babies soon, a lot of them, and nobody's pretending otherwise. That's the shift you're seeing everywhere. People rebuilding the future not just with bricks and bread, but with babies. Here's your historical fact. After the Black Death, Europe experienced a significant increase in birth rates. This wasn't just random biology. It was a social response to catastrophic loss. Entire towns had been hollowed out, families reduced to 1 or 2 survivors, and so, for those who remained, reproduction became a kind of rebuilding. A deeply personal, deeply physical rebellion against death. You see it every day now. Midwives are busier than ever. You've helped rebuild 2 homes in the past month alone for couples expanding their households. One family added a second room just for their infant daughter, the first child born in that house since the plague. When the baby cried for the first time, the entire street fell silent to hear it. Then someone clapped. Then everyone clapped. There are still ghosts, of course. Every new life arrives in the shadow of what was lost. Babies named after dead siblings, mothers whispering lullabies they once sang to children who didn't make it. But the grief is different now. Not raw, not sharp, It's like a scar that doesn't ache unless pressed too hard. And everyone's pressing forward. That's not to say it's easy. A baby cries through the night, and suddenly you remember how thin the cottage walls are. Someone gets pregnant and vanishes into illness, because maternal health isn't exactly a science yet. A few unlucky newborns don't make it past the first winter. It's still medieval life after all. There's mud and danger and cold. But the sheer number of new births? It's undeniable. The village has gone from quiet to noisy in just a few seasons. And with children come other changes. You're building more than homes now. You're building community. One day someone suggests starting a school. Not the fancy Latin kind. Just a room where older kids can learn to write their names, add numbers, maybe read a few simple texts. You help convert the back of the guild hall into a learning space. Someone donates a bench. Someone else carves the alphabet onto a board. It's rudimentary, but it's more than you had. Then there's the question of who will teach. Turns out the beekeeper can read. Fluently. No one knows how he learned. He claims he traded candles for lessons while traveling. But now he's got a dozen children reciting their letters and arguing over how to spell goose. You hear them shouting rhymes through the window one morning and feel something warm in your chest. Laughter. It's coming back. Here's your fringe fact. In some regions, the post-plague baby boom was so strong that authorities grew concerned about overpopulation. Again. A full swing from mass death to birth anxiety in just a few decades. You can't help but laugh at the irony. One year you're burying people in mass graves. The next you're worried about having too many mouths to feed. But the shift is more than biological. It's psychological. Children mean the future is real again. Before, it felt abstract. Something only the rich or delusional could afford to imagine. Now, it's there, toddling barefoot through muddy streets, getting into your storage shed, asking absurd questions like, what does the sky taste like? You don't know. You also didn't know you'd live long enough to be asked. There's a scholarly debate about how this baby boom affected gender roles. Did women gain more agency as childbearers in a world desperate for life? Or did the pressure to repopulate reinforce traditional roles, narrowing their options? The answer seems to be both. You've seen women step into power, traders, healers, landowners, but also watched others pulled back into the home by expectation or exhaustion. You visit Mare, the stonemason's niece, now heavily pregnant and still working. She sharpens her chisel as she talks about adding another layer to the village wall. She's planning for defense in case raiders come again. Her belly is huge, her hands are blistered, and she doesn't ask for help. You offer anyway. She smirks and says, I'm not carving stones for me, you know. You nod. You understand. Everything now feels geared toward legacy, toward what's next. Even your own garden, which once fed just you, now has a second row, just in case. In case visitors come. In case someone needs extra. In case you have a child one day, you don't even know who with, but you're planning anyway. That's new. One night, you walk the edge of town and look out at the fields. You count the houses with smoke rising from the chimneys. You listen to the muffled sound of lullabies, of dogs barking, of someone shouting for a child to come inside. It's messy, it's loud, it's alive. You think back to that first spring after the plague, the silence, the emptiness, the sheer weight of survival. And now, the world isn't just recovering, it's growing. And for the first time, so are you. You're being fitted for new clothes, and you have no idea how this happened. You walked into the market for salt and maybe a bit of honey, and now you're standing half naked behind a curtain made of burlap, while a woman with a measuring cord mutters to herself and pokes your ribs. Breathe out, she says. You do, she frowns. Too much barley, she adds, not unkindly. It started as a joke, a group of young weavers and seamstresses offering tailored garments for post-plague bodies, and somehow it stuck. People are rounder now, stronger, sometimes unevenly patched together from injuries or starvation or childbirth. Nothing fits like it used to. So they're making things that do. And not just for nobles. You step out of the stall, draped in a tunic the color of a sunrise, deep orange with little flecks of green. You feel ridiculous. And also, incredible. It fits like it was grown on you. The woman hands you a belt woven with symbols and says, "No charge, but bring me some beeswax next time." You nod, still confused, still admiring your reflection in a polished basin someone propped up against a cartwheel. Fashion has entered the chat. You're not alone. The entire village is dressing differently now. Brighter colors, looser fits, more embroidery, less drab, less mourning. It's like the population collectively decided that if the world's going to end again, they'd rather go out looking fantastic. It makes sense. The plague stripped everything away. Names, roles, modesty, rules. What's left is the raw need to be seen, not as a survivor, but as yourself. And yourself doesn't want to wear burlap for the rest of time. Here's your historical fact. After the Black Death, a wave of new fashion emerged across Europe. Brighter dyes, tighter tailoring, and innovations in layering all became more common. With fewer people to clothe, there was more access to fine materials, even among the lower classes. Silk trickled down, so did velvet, and people wore it proudly. And with new clothes came a new kind of hygiene. That one's a surprise. You'd think after everything people would give up on cleanliness entirely, but instead you see the opposite. People are washing more, not just for health, but for dignity. Soap making is booming. Bathhouses, where they still exist, are being rebuilt, and not just for nobles or monks. You rig a rain barrel with a little spout and start bathing every few days. It's cold, unpleasant, and entirely life-changing. You wash your hands before meals. You scrub your boots with sand when they get too thick with mud. You even start brushing your teeth with ash and mint leaves, which feels like chewing on fire, but makes your breath smell less like a compost heap. People notice. And speaking of noticing, romance gets interesting. In the before times, courtship involved years of indirect glances, dowry negotiations, and absolutely no touching. Now, you overhear two people flirt over turnips at market and kiss by the well an hour later. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it's awkward or ends in shouting. But it's refreshingly honest. One couple in town holds a public commitment ceremony in the newly rebuilt chapel, and instead of Latin vows, they just list all the things they like about each other. "She doesn't flinch at blood," he says. "He sings to chickens," she adds. People cheer. Someone throws bread. You begin to realize something. In the wake of mass death, people crave beauty. Not extravagance, not wealth, just small, beautiful things. A song sung well, a coat that fits, a bath, a kiss. Life is being lived now like it might disappear tomorrow, because it might. And here's a delightfully strange fringe fact. Some people start wearing perfume, even in rural areas. Distilled floral waters made from lavender, rosemary, or even rose petals. It's not just about smell. It's about reclaiming pleasure. You help a neighbor distill rosemary oil once, and her house smells like spring for days. You steal a bit, dab it behind your ears, and immediately feel 15% fancier. But as fashion and hygiene evolve, so does the judgment. Old voices don't die easily. A few elders mutter about vanity, about sin, about the danger of pride in a world that's barely held together by grain and prayer. Some towns pass minor sumptuary laws, trying to limit who can wear what. "No silk for farmers," one document declares. You look down at your belt, woven with tiny gold thread, and decide you don't care. That's the scholarly debate. Did fashion after the Black Death empower the common folk, or reinforce class divides? Some argue it gave peasants access to previously forbidden luxuries, while others say the elite simply tightened the rules. You see both playing out. But in your town, the mood is, wear what you want, live while you can. You pass a girl in a tunic dyed the color of fresh violets. Her shoes are mismatched, but she walks like a queen. You nod, she nods back. Another small rebellion won. You start putting more care into how you dress each morning, not to impress, but to participate, to show you're still here. You stitch a pattern into your sleeve. You shave more often. You fix your posture. You notice how many others are doing the same, holding their heads higher, polishing buckles, combing hair. It's subtle, but powerful. The world didn't just kill millions, it rubbed out identities. So now, you're redrawing yourself. and everyone else is doing the same. There's still mud, still lice, still the occasional outbreak of something ugly. But you've seen worse. You survived worse. And if that means you want to wear green linen on a Tuesday just because it makes you feel alive, then by all means. You stand in front of your little polished basin again, looking at yourself. New tunic, clean face, bright eyes. You almost don't recognize the person staring back. Almost. You step into the town square and stop. Something's different. It takes a moment to register. Your eyes are still adjusting from the shaded lane behind the bakery, but then it hits you. Space. There's space where there used to be chaos. The square is wider, cleaner, and someone has rerouted the drainage, so there's no more ankle-deep mud puddle in the corner that used to swallow shoes whole. Stalls are neatly arranged in rows instead of fighting for corners. There's even a fountain in the middle now, just a simple stone basin that trickles cold water into a trough. But it's a marvel. The whole thing feels intentional. This is not the town you remember, and that's exactly the point. You walk the new street slowly, listening to the buzz of voices. You recognize some faces, neighbors, fellow guild members, the man who keeps selling smoked fish out of an ox cart that probably violates 5 hygiene theories at once. But there are also new people. A family from a northern village raised by bandits, a trader from the coast with dyed blue sleeves, and a mule that carries bolts of rare cloth. A widow who moved in 2 months ago and now bakes the best oatcakes anyone's had in years. The town is changing, not just growing, changing. After the plague, it felt like time had stopped. People clung to old routines like driftwood, hoping the world would snap back into shape. But that never happened. The old rules didn't work anymore, so now people are making new ones, and cities are following suit, or leading the charge, depending on who you ask. It starts with roads. Before, streets wound wherever they wanted, curling like a drunken snake, choking out space with crammed buildings and collapsed stalls. But now, someone's gone and widened them, ripped out shoddy alleys, opened walkways, cleared debris. You even spot a signpost, an actual signpost, carved with directions for travelers. No one's sure who approved it, but it's there. There's a feeling in the air, something you've never sensed before. Organization. Here's your historical fact. Following the Black Death, many European cities began to restructure. With so many properties abandoned or burned, urban planners, though no one called them that yet, had a rare chance to redesign. Streets were widened, sanitation improved, and in some cases, building codes were introduced for the first time. Some towns even created zoning rules. Primitive, yes, but a spark of what would eventually become modern urban planning. You walk past what used to be the tannery district, once unbearable with its reek of death and boiling hide. Now it's further down, closer to the river. The stench is still there, but manageable. Someone had the bright idea to move the smelliest trades to the outskirts and keep the central square for markets, gatherings, and, surprisingly, music. There's a man with a lute playing under a makeshift awning. A girl dances nearby, clapping her hands to the beat. A basket sits in front of them, filling slowly with coins and apples. No one kicks them out. No one tells them to stop. In fact, a few merchants glance up and smile. It draws customers. You sit on a bench, newly built, smoothed by careful hands, and take it all in. A baker calls out his prices in rhyme. A butcher passes by with his apprentice, pointing to a shop front he's thinking of renting. Children run without tripping on rubble. The elderly sit under the shade of a tree that didn't exist 6 months ago. The tree, you learn, was planted by the council after someone suggested the square needed less stone and more sky. And here's your fringe fact. In some cities after the plague, the streets were intentionally reoriented to allow more sunlight and airflow, especially in dense neighborhoods. People didn't fully understand infection, but they did notice that cleaner, brighter spaces felt safer. Some towns even added public gardens or green spaces for air and morale. You spot your friend Mare measuring planks by the edge of the square. She's working on a small amphitheater, nothing grand, just a raised wooden platform with seating. For meetings, she says, and plays maybe, or trials, or dancing. Whatever we need. You ask who approved it. She shrugs. We did. That's the thing. The idea of authority is shifting. It used to mean whatever noble happened to own the most land or had the loudest soldiers. Now it means whoever shows up, does the work, and earns the town's trust. You're seeing councils emerge. Some elected, some informally chosen. People make decisions by consensus, not decree. It's clumsy. It's chaotic. But it feels real. There's a debate now about walls. Some say the town needs a new defensive wall, higher and stronger in case of raiders. Others argue that walls keep trade out, keep fresh ideas from getting in. You sit in on a council meeting where the carpenter proposes watchtowers instead, cheaper, quicker, and less isolating. The beekeeper seconds it. You add a hesitant, aye, the vote passes. No one gets dragged away in chains for disagreeing. You'd never seen a town meeting before the plague. Now you're part of one. Here's the scholarly debate. Did the post-plague rebuilding of cities lay the groundwork for later democratic institutions? Some historians think so. They argue that as people took local governance into their own hands, especially in places where lords had vanished or failed, seeds of participatory rule began to grow. Others claim it was simply survival, temporary improvisation that faded when kings returned. But you're not interested in future speculation. You're watching it happen now. And it's beautiful, not perfect. There's still conflict, still hunger, still people clinging to old hierarchies. But the shape of the town is changing to reflect the shape of the people in it. And that shape is scrappy, resourceful, stubbornly hopeful. You help finish a new bridge later that week, spanning the little stream that cuts behind the granary. It's nothing special, flat planks, rope rails, but it saves people half a day's walk. You carve your initials into one of the beams. So does everyone else who helped. It's a bridge and a monument. You walk home through the new lanes, past painted shutters and open doors. You hear laughter, hammering, music. You don't feel like a visitor anymore. You feel like a citizen. You're standing in what used to be a monastery, holding a book you can't read. It's heavy, leather-bound, scarred by time, the corners curled like dry leaves, and it smells like dust and oil and old secrets. You flip through the pages slowly, eyes skimming over neat rows of letters that might as well be magic spells. Latin, not the kind spoken in church homilies, but the real deal, the academic kind. The kind meant for monks, not for people like you. Except the monks are gone, or most of them anyway. The plague didn't care about illuminated manuscripts or the sanctity of stone walls. It cut through monasteries just like it did through cities and farms. And now these once silent halls echo with new voices. Yours and a handful of others like you. Ordinary folks poking around the rubble of sacred knowledge, wondering if any of it can be salvaged. You set the book down gently and look around. Shelves have collapsed. Scribes' desks are broken. Ink has dried in its pots. But still, there's something here. Not just relics, potential. A girl with ink-stained fingers, Ely from the Weaver's Guild, holds up a different volume. This one has drawings, she says, of plants. You peer over her shoulder. She's right. It's a medieval herbal, probably used for healing or prayer. She grins like a thief who's just stolen fire. You're part of a strange new thing, the accidental birth of a school. It started a few weeks ago when the town council asked what to do with the abandoned monastery. Some wanted to burn it. Too many ghosts, they said. Others wanted to turn it into a granary. But a few curious minds, mostly young, suggested another idea. Let's keep the books, they said. Let's try to read them. And just like that, a new kind of learning was born. Here's your historical fact. After the Black Death, many monasteries and religious institutions were left half empty or collapsed entirely. In their absence, knowledge began to leak out into new hands. Some early universities, like those in Oxford or Paris, weathered the storm and adapted. Others saw an influx of students from unexpected backgrounds, people who, before the plague, would never have dreamed of studying scripture or medicine or law. You now spend your afternoons here, cleaning, cataloging, listening. No one's officially in charge. There's no professor, just a rotating group of people who know slightly more than the rest. A retired clerk from the city who used to scribe contracts, a merchant's son who traveled to Venice and learned basic Greek, a nun who survived the plague and now quietly teaches letters to anyone willing to hold a quill the right way. It's chaotic, but it works, and it's not just books. People bring scrolls, maps, stories. Oral history is treated like scripture. A traveling bard visits once a month and recites epics by heart. You hear of a boy in another town who can repeat entire sermons word for word, so they write him down. People are copying things again, not perfectly, but earnestly. Eli teaches you how to make ink from walnut husks. You practice by writing your own name. It takes a week before it stops looking like a dying spider. But then, one day, there it is. Your name, steady and clear, in your own hand. You stare at it like it's a spell, because it is. And here's your fringe fact. In some regions, especially Italy and parts of the Holy Roman Empire, the immediate post-plague years saw the creation of new lay brotherhoods focused not on worship, but on learning. These groups sometimes evolved into early educational societies, precursors to academies and guild-run schools. Some were open to women. Some even encouraged children to ask questions. You've never seen anything like it. Kids now spend part of their day learning numbers, shapes, letters. A few are already better readers than their parents. They still chase chickens and play in the mud, but they also debate whether the moon follows you when you walk. The questions are the best part. Why do some trees lose their leaves? What is blood, really? Where does the sun go at night? You don't know, but someone might. And the idea that someone could know, that's new. That's exhilarating. You see it in their eyes when a question gets answered, and even more when it doesn't. One day you help hang a banner above the monastery's old doorway. It's made from dyed linen and stitched with words in 3 languages, Latin, French, and the local dialect. It reads roughly, "Here we learn because we lived." There's a scholarly debate about whether this hunger for knowledge was a direct reaction to the plague, or simply a delayed echo of changes already brewing. Did people start studying because death made them curious? Or was it just a matter of access? Books lying unguarded, wisdom waiting to be taken? Probably both. But for you, it feels like a wildfire lit by grief and fanned by curiosity. You start keeping your own notebook, nothing fancy. Just scraps of things you've learned. How to tie knots 3 different ways. The Latin word for sky. A recipe for vinegar tonic. A sketch of the old church floor plan. You find yourself reading it at night, flipping through the pages like they're a map to something bigger. And they are. You're no scholar. You still spend your mornings mending fences and checking on your barley. But part of your day, part of you, is now a student. You never imagined that would happen. No one did. And yet here you are, reading about stars, listening to theories, questioning things you used to just accept. And it changes how you see the world. You look at your tools differently now, wondering who first designed the scythe, the wheelbarrow, the mortar. You walk under the moon and wonder why it glows. You listen to birds and try to remember which pitch matches which species. You don't always understand, but you try. Because learning, you've discovered, isn't about knowing. It's about not knowing and caring enough to ask anyway. You return to the monastery after dusk one night, passing through the open doorway lit by lanterns. Inside, someone is reading aloud, voice steady, words echoing off the stone walls. A small crowd sits around them, listening with the quiet reverence once reserved for saints. You sit too, cross-legged, tired from the day's work and full of wonder. You're not just rebuilding houses anymore, you're rebuilding thought. It starts with whispers, at first quiet and nervous, like someone testing a forbidden word. Then louder, more curious. You hear them in the market, over the clang of iron and the cawing of crows. You hear them in the guild hall between trades, and on the edges of fields during rest breaks. Questions mostly, possibilities. Wild, audacious ideas. Some about the natural world, others about human behavior, a few about God. And none of them are coming from the church pulpit. They're coming from everywhere else. You notice it especially in the younger ones. The girl who used to trail after the beekeeper now keeps a scroll tucked into her apron, scribbling notes when no one's looking. One of the blacksmith's twins recites lines of poetry while feeding pigs. The baker's son, barely 9, has built a sundial out of stones and a spoon. When asked how he figured it out, he shrugs. Just watched the shadows. It doesn't seem like much, but it is. Because for the first time, people aren't just surviving, they're thinking. Not just about the day's work or next week's harvest, but about meaning, about why, about how things work, how ideas spread, how the world might fit together beyond the horizon of their immediate lives. You've begun to call this phase the Great Wondering, even if no one else uses the term. You're living in a time when information isn't controlled by one source anymore. The books in the monastery are being copied, sometimes inaccurately, sometimes hilariously so. Stories are told and retold, changed just enough to open new doors. People have tasted the edge of the abyss, and now they want answers. Here's your historical fact. In the century after the Black Death, Europe saw a surge in intellectual activity. The trauma of mass death and the failure of traditional institutions left many with deep existential questions. Some scholars directly attribute the Renaissance to this psychic rupture, this sudden, continent-wide re-examination of humanity's place in the cosmos. It didn't start in royal courts or great universities. It started in corners, in back rooms, in people like you. And here's the fringe detail. Even though the printing press wouldn't arrive for another few decades, there were already early experiments with woodblock printing and copying in batches, especially in monasteries and coastal cities. Some towns created public reading walls, chalked or painted summaries of current events, trade prices, or poems for anyone who could decipher them. Your town tries this too. A large slate is mounted near the guild hall. Each week, someone writes a question on it. Nothing fancy. Just something to provoke thought. Last week, is it worse to die without knowing or live without asking? You're not sure who wrote it, but it haunted you for 3 days. The appetite for ideas grows. You see it in trade, where people now ask why something works instead of just accepting it. The cooper who builds barrels begins calculating volume. The brewer experiments with herbs. A local shepherd writes down birthing patterns in goats and discovers he can predict fertility cycles. You can't decide if he's a genius or just extremely bored. Either way, it matters. Because here's what's changing. Knowledge is no longer locked in stone towers. It's leaking out like wine from a cracked barrel, and it tastes better than anything you remember. One afternoon, you help a woman named Rosa fix her loom. She's recently moved in from a ruined village downriver, and while she works, she hums strange songs in a dialect you don't recognize. When you ask where she learned to weave, she tells you about a monastery in Spain, where the monks recorded every pattern they found, from silk to sackcloth. She memorized them. She offers to teach you a stitch that mimics the movement of birds in flight. You agree. Then you teach her the local stitch for good fortune. You both laugh, realizing they're nearly identical. Ideas are spreading faster than diseases ever did. You get letters now. Actual letters. They come folded in scraps of parchment, carried by traders or wandering scholars. One from a friend in another town describes a man who's drawing the inside of people to learn how bodies work. Another includes a diagram of a strange machine that lifts water using only gravity and a crank. The final line of the letter reads, "We may not live to see it, but someone will fly one day." You read that twice, then a third time, then you look up. Why not? There's a scholarly debate bubbling just beneath the surface of this moment. Whether knowledge should be free. Some argue it belongs to the learned, to the trained. Others say the world has changed and learning must be communal. You already know where you stand. You've seen what ignorance costs. You've buried too many to believe that truth belongs only to the privileged. So you start sharing. You copy diagrams. You write down every recipe and repair technique you can remember. You even create a crude chart of local plant remedies with Eli's help. It's not polished, but it's legible. And that's enough. People come to you with their own notes, half-burned pages, memories of lectures, songs with mathematical meaning hidden in the verses. You keep them in a box under your bed. You call it your thinking chest, and yes, it's silly. But it grows heavier every week. One day, you and a few others decide to name the little learning group that meets in the old chapel after hours. You toss around serious titles, the Circle of Knowing, the Lantern Guild, but settle in the end on something lighter, the listeners, because that's what you are. Listening to the world, listening to each other, and sometimes even listening to the silence between questions. You're no philosopher. You're not building flying machines or translating Greek, but you know what wonder feels like, and you know how precious it is. The world didn't just survive the plague, it caught fire with curiosity. You think about that when you sit alone at night, flipping through your notebook. Your handwriting's improved. So has your mind. You're kneeling by the fire with a mortar and pestle, grinding something that smells like the unholy marriage of pine tar and bad breath. You've been at it for 20 minutes, and your hands are sticky, your nose is offended, and your eyes are stinging. Still, you keep going. Because this, whatever this is, might help someone breathe easier tomorrow. You found yourself in the strange and ever-expanding world of medieval medicine 2.0, or, as one village elder put it, while spitting into a pot of boiled nettles, not dying in as many dumb ways as we used to. It's hard to say exactly how it happened, but over the past year or two, the way people treat illness has shifted. Not entirely. You're still going to find someone burning sage to chase away demons, and someone else applying butter to open wounds like that's a good idea. But there's less fatalism now. Less of that resigned shrug and mutter of God's will. More action, more curiosity. You remember the early days when any sign of fever had people barricading their doors or dragging the sick into the forest with a priest and a shovel. Now? Now someone gets a cough and 3 neighbors show up with teas, tinctures, and questions. That's your cue. You're now part of a small but growing group experimenting with remedies. You're not a doctor, not by a long shot, but that's kind of the point. The old doctors died, or fled, or wore ridiculous beaked masks and poked people with sticks. Now medicine is in the hands of the survivors, which means it's in yours. Today's project, a salve for chest pain. Your friend Rosa swears by the ingredients: pine resin, garlic, honey, and bear fat. You don't ask where she gets the bear fat. You just nod and keep stirring. Here's your historical fact. Post-plague Europe saw a rise in what we'd now call folk medicine, but also a crucial shift in how people understood disease. The complete failure of elite medical theory during the plague, shout out to humors and urine charts, discredited many traditional authorities. In their place rose midwives, herbalists, and traveling healers who used observation and trial and error. In short, the people who stayed when things got bad. You're one of them now. You didn't choose it, but you didn't run either. You've learned to identify over 30 herbs. You know how to make poultices that draw infection from wounds. You've helped set a broken arm and, on one especially grim afternoon, pulled a rotten tooth with a spoon and a prayer. The boy thanked you with tears in his eyes. And a fresh egg. It's not glamorous, it's not clean, and no one's calling you master of physic, but it works, sometimes. Here's the fringe fact for the day. In some towns, people began keeping household books of remedies, personal journals recording what treatments worked, what didn't, and what killed the neighbor's pig. These weren't written in Latin, they were in the vernacular, often illustrated with rough sketches, passed down through families. You're helping write one now. Eli's drawing the pictures. It's clunky and awkward and weirdly satisfying. One night, a woman shows up at your door, carrying her daughter wrapped in a wool shawl. The girl has a rash blooming across her chest, bright and angry looking. You don't know exactly what it is, but you've seen something like it before, on a boy who spent too much time sleeping in wet clothes. You grind rose petals, honey, and chamomile, apply the paste, and wait. The next day, the girl is giggling and trying to feed your cat a walnut. You call that a success. But not everything works. There are still moments where someone gasps for breath, and no amount of teas or oils or whispered songs can help. You've lost people. Too many. You still get that cold drop in your stomach when someone says, "It started with a cough." You're no miracle worker. you're just a person trying to make fewer funerals happen. There's an open debate in your little circle of healers about bleeding. Half think it's a barbaric leftover from old medicine. The other half swear it saved their cousin. You try it once, you never do it again. What you do believe in now is cleanliness. It sounds absurd, but it's working. You encourage people to boil water before washing wounds. You burn old linens after treating the sick. You start making your own soap. It smells like ash and mint and hope. And it's catching on. You see more people bathing now, not just in the river, but in makeshift tubs. You see mothers washing hands before cooking. You see walls whitewashed to keep out fleas. You even help dig a latrine trench farther from the homes so the entire village doesn't stink like a sick horse by midsummer. None of this is revolutionary by today's standards, but for this time, it is. One day, a traveler stops by, a merchant with a limp and a saddlebag full of copper cups. He tells you about a town where people isolate the sick in separate houses until they recover. He calls them quarantine cottages. You make a note. You share the idea at the next meeting. No one laughs. In fact, a man offers to donate one of his barns. You keep track of everything. What worked, what didn't, how long a fever lasted, what kind of soil makes the best poultices. You're collecting knowledge like it's treasure, because that's exactly what it is. And the more you collect, the more you begin to feel something strange. Confidence. You're not just reacting to illness anymore. You're preparing for it. That's what's new. You remember a time when the plague felt like a monster you could only run from. Now, you're learning how to slow it down. You've stopped trying to win and started trying to understand. That's a better fight. Here's the scholarly debate that follows you like a shadow. Was this the start of modern medicine, or just a desperate improvisation? Some historians argue that no real medical progress came until centuries later. Others point to this exact moment, when healing left the hands of the elite and entered the hands of the people, as the true beginning of practical care. You don't care about the verdict. You care that a boy who would have died last year just ran past your door chasing a chicken. You stretch your back, clean your hands with snow and vinegar, and tuck your notes into the wooden chest beneath your bed. You're no doctor, but you're a healer now. And that's enough. You're staring at a painting that doesn't make sense. It's hanging, if you can call it that, on a wooden wall in the back room of what used to be the town tannery, now turned into something halfway between a studio and a sanctuary. It's small, the size of a loaf of bread, painted on a splintered board, the colors raw and somehow unsettling. A man floats above a burning village. His hands are open, but he's got no face. Instead, a flower blooms where his eyes should be, and birds pour out of his mouth like smoke. You blink, then you blink again. It's not religious. Or maybe it is. It's not beautiful, not in the old way. There are no saints, no golden halos, no perfectly symmetrical angels. But you can't look away. That's the moment you realize art has changed, or rather, you have. Back before the plague, art was a tidy thing, controlled, scripted, commissioned by bishops, kings, and guilds who wanted order, piety, and the correct number of cherubs per square foot. Artists copied, embellished, obeyed. But now? Now the world has cracked open, and what's pouring out isn't order. It's grief and wonder, and the maddening, defiant desire to say something before it's too late. So people are painting things no one asked them to. You walk through what's being called the gallery lane, just a row of old storage sheds where locals have begun displaying their work. Some use canvas or salvaged wood. Others scratch images into clay, carve into bone, or burn patterns into leather. The subjects? Chaos, bodies, fire, stars, sometimes just hands, open, reaching, bleeding. You stop in front of a piece depicting a plague pit, stark black lines, skeletal faces, and flowers blooming from their eyes. The caption reads, "We remember because we must. No signature." You wonder if the artist is even still alive. Here's your historical fact. After the Black Death, European art took a dark turn. Images of death, especially memento mori, reminders of mortality, became popular. The danse macabre motif, showing skeletons dancing with the living, emerged as a cultural obsession. artists who survived the plague no longer painted just to glorify life or religion. They painted to confront death, to understand it, and to mock it. You see it everywhere now. A sculpture in the village square shows two figures, one alive, one clearly dead, holding hands. The inscription says, "Companions, even now." Someone painted a mural of an angel vomiting gold coins into a gutter with the phrase, "Heaven can't be bribed," scrawled underneath in charcoal. A priest tried to have it removed. The town council voted to keep it. And here's your fringe fact. Artists began signing their names more frequently after the plague. It seems small, but it matters. For centuries, art was anonymous, seen as a craft, not a voice. But now, with mortality so visible, people want credit. They want to be remembered. You find one signature etched into a frame with a note beside it. "I survived. I made this." You decide to try your hand at it. Not painting exactly. Your fingers are better suited to mending tools than holding brushes, but something. You gather scraps of fabric, leftover dye, broken thread, and start assembling them into patterns. It's not pretty. It doesn't even have a purpose. But it feels like something. A way to say, "This happened. I was here." Others join you. A boy carves dreams into soapstone. A midwife paints scenes of birth in impossible colors. A merchant-turned-potter sculpts masks, some laughing, some weeping, some cracked right down the center. The point isn't skill, it's release. Art has become a language for those who can't find words. And after the plague, that's almost everyone. There's debate, of course. There always is. Some think this new art is blasphemous. Others call it indulgent. "What good is a painting when the grain stores are half empty?" someone mutters. But for every scoff, there's a face standing silently in front of a wall, eyes brimming, lips pressed together, like they've finally been told a truth they didn't know they needed. That's the thing about this art. It feels true, even when it's messy, especially when it's messy. You hear a traveler describe a cathedral being rebuilt down south, where the stained glass is no longer just saints, but scenes of daily life. Harvests, childbirth, lovers. He says one window even shows the plague itself. Black boils, twisted limbs, a mother holding her child as both fade into shadow. People weep when they see it. You nod. You understand. This isn't about beauty anymore, or rather, not the old kind. The new beauty is raw, honest, sometimes ugly, but alive. And here's the scholarly debate. Did the trauma of the Black Death permanently alter the trajectory of Western art? Was it the spark that lit the fire of the Renaissance? Or did it simply strip away the illusion that art must serve religion or state? Some say it birthed humanism. Others say it unshackled the soul. You don't care what they call it. You just know what it means to look at something someone made and feel seen. One night, you light a candle in your cottage and hang your little patchwork piece on the wall. It's crooked. The colors clash. It smells faintly of vinegar. But when your neighbor visits and asks what it is, you say, "It's the year I didn't die." He nods. That's enough. You're in the bakery when you see her argue with the miller, and she wins. Not by shouting, not by crying, not even by swinging the heavy sack of flour she's cradling against her hip. She wins by looking him square in the eye and saying, "You wouldn't even have wheat to grind if it weren't for me." Then she waits. Calm, steady. And the miller, red-faced and fumbling, mutters something, nods, and drops the price by 2 copper pieces. Everyone watches. No one says anything. But when she walks out, people clear a path like she's royalty. You follow her out the door, bread in hand, half smiling. Because that wasn't just a flower dispute, that was a moment, and her name is Sabine. You know Sabine because everyone knows Sabine. She's a widow, one of the many made by the plague. But unlike some, she didn't vanish into grief or go begging door to door. She kept her husband's tools, fixed the roof herself, and started trading in his name before the dirt on his grave had settled. Now she's known as the one who sharpens blades, bakes her own bricks, and runs a profitable dairy out of her back garden. Her hands are calloused. Her voice is low. She's the kind of woman people respect without really understanding why. And she's not the only one. Across town, The old brewer's wife has taken over the entire business. Her beer is stronger, her casks better sealed, and her accounts balanced with frightening precision. She hires 2 young women to help and pays them in coin and bread, which, if we're being honest, is the smarter wage. The men who survived the plague are noticing, and they're adjusting. You're watching something happen that no one dares say aloud. Not yet. But it's as plain as the sun. Women are stepping in, stepping up, and, more shockingly, not stepping back. Here's your historical fact. After the Black Death, with so many men dead or permanently weakened, women across Europe took on roles previously denied to them. They managed estates, ran shops, worked trades, and in some regions, even entered early forms of local governance. Legal status didn't always catch up, but cultural memory did. The survivors remembered who kept the village running when everything else collapsed. And here's a quietly astonishing fringe detail. In some towns, especially in parts of France, women's names begin appearing on guild records for the first time. Not just as widows maintaining their husbands' businesses, but as full members acknowledged for their own skill. You find one such name etched into a half-rotted guild plaque. Monsieur Rousseau, maker of fine combs. Beneath it, faintly scratched, is a second name in a different hand. Claudine, her daughter. It's subtle, but it's real. Back in your village, the midwife has become something of a legend. Her name is Odella, and she delivered 7 babies during the worst of the plague, buried 3 of them with her own hands, and never once charged a coin. Now she's the closest thing your town has to a doctor. People bring her chickens in thanks. She has a shelf full of potions and salves, all neatly labeled, and no one questions her when she tells them to sit down and shut up while she checks their pulse. You visit her once for a burn. You touched a hot kettle without thinking, distracted by someone shouting, and she applies a mixture of lard and lavender while telling you about her childhood, her dreams, and the names of every medicinal root growing in the forest nearby. She knows more than any priest ever told you.
No.
So you write her name in your notebook, not because she asked you to, but because she deserves to be remembered. And that's the quiet revolution. Memory. Before, women's names vanished, written out of scrolls, footnotes, songs. Even those who saved lives were forgotten by the time the harvest came. But now, you're starting to hear people say things like, "This house was built by Mare," or "That garden, Sabine's." Credit is being given, passed from mouth to mouth, held gently like an heirloom. There's still resistance, of course. You hear a trader mutter that women should stay in the home, while buying cheese from a woman who built her own stall. You watch a priest scowl when Odella speaks too confidently about sickness. You even hear rumors of towns where newly powerful women were driven out or accused of witchcraft. But in your village, that won't happen. You won't let it. Here's the scholarly debate. Did the post-plague shift in gender roles lead directly to greater equality? Or was it temporary, a practical adjustment during a crisis that eventually snapped back into patriarchy? Some say it was the seed of something bigger, something that would take centuries to grow. Others argue it was nothing more than a blip, a historical accident. But for now, in this moment, you can feel the balance tipping. You help a young girl named Lisette mend a roof beam. She's 11 and already stronger than most grown men. She asks if she can learn to forge nails. You say yes. She doesn't say thank you. She just nods like it's obvious she belongs at the anvil. You see the same spark in the baker's youngest, in the candlemaker's wife, in Ely, who now teaches boys and girls how to read under the arch of the ruined abbey. No one questions her authority anymore. They just show up and listen. The future, it seems, doesn't have a single voice anymore. It has many, and some of them are higher-pitched, sharper, angrier, wiser. Some wear skirts, some wear boots, some wear both. All of them carry the weight of memory and the fire of someone who knows the world won't hand them power. They'll have to take it. And they are. You walk past Sabine's dairy one morning and see her teaching 2 boys how to milk a goat. She's got a stick in one hand and a bowl in the other. "Not like that," she snaps. "Unless you want to get kicked so hard you'll see God." You keep walking, smiling. She's not just rebuilding, she's rewriting the script. You wake up to shouting, not angry, not frightened, but that loud, excited kind of yelling people do when something very strange is happening. You throw on your cloak and step outside, still half asleep, only to find half the village gathered around a cart stuck in the mud. Atop the cart stands a man dressed in more colors than should be legal: blues, reds, greens, and something close to orange, if orange were angry. He's got a long feather in his cap, a brass ring in his ear, and he's juggling 3 apples while reciting a poem that doesn't rhyme. He calls himself a news bringer. You're not sure if that's a title or a threat. He's not alone. There's a girl with him, barefoot, eyes sharp as flint, who plays a bone flute while walking in slow circles. Every few notes, she stops to sell tiny scrolls for a copper coin each. You buy one. It smells like onion skin and damp wool, but the ink is fresh. It reads, "King in the north deposed by cousin. Plague returns to marshlands. Sea flooded South Harbor, 10 ships lost. Also, a goat gave birth to triplets shaped like saints." You read it twice. The part about the saints makes you snort. Welcome to the New Information Network. Chaos, rumors, and roadside poetry. Here's your historical fact. After the Black Death, news began moving differently. Before the plague, information mostly came from the pulpit, town criers, or traveling merchants. But with so many old systems disrupted and literacy spreading, new forms of media took root. Wandering storytellers, balladeers, and pamphlet peddlers became living newspapers, blending fact and fiction into something oddly digestible. For many villages, they were the only connection to the wider world. And right now, your village is hooked. The newsbringer and the flute girl set up a little stage, 2 barrels and a plank, and begin a kind of performance. Songs about uprisings in distant cities, jokes about nobles with boils, dramatic reenactments of fish falling from the sky. People laugh, they cheer, they toss coins. Even the town priest, usually unimpressed by anything that doesn't involve incense or Latin, watches from a distance with an expression halfway between suspicion and amusement. You learn 3 things from this visit. 1. The king of somewhere has died, maybe. 2. There's a comet in the eastern sky that makes dogs howl. 3. Someone in a town called Bele has invented a wheel that turns without being pushed. Perpetual motion. It's nonsense, says Thomas the Smith. But good nonsense. And that's the thing. It doesn't really matter what's true, not entirely. What matters is that people are listening again, to each other, to stories, to the world. Here's your fringe fact. Some towns began paying regular scribes or messengers to write newsletters, not public printed papers like we know today, but handwritten bulletins shared among merchants and guilds. These often contained prices, travel warnings, gossip, and occasionally celestial omens. Early versions of journalism, created not to preserve truth, but to keep people alert, aware, and a little less terrified of the unknown. Your town is starting its own version. Ely writes weekly happenings on a chalkboard outside the bakery. Harvest totals, new births, who fell into the river again, always Martin, and what travelers reported passing through. Someone adds drawings, someone else tries poetry. Within a month, the board has its own name, the Crow's Crier. No one can explain why. You just go with it. Information is becoming fun and dangerous, because with news comes lies, too. Not everyone wants truth. Some people want control. You hear whispers of towns where false stories led to riots, where someone blamed the plague on foreigners or heretics, or the baker who talked too much. You remember the early days, how fear made people cruel. So you take notes, you compare reports. You teach younger kids how to ask, "How do you know that?" And, "Who told you?" It feels small, but it's important. You're planting the seeds of skepticism, just enough to make them curious, not paranoid. There's a scholarly debate about this very shift. Whether the spread of information after the plague democratized knowledge, or just made misinformation more accessible. Some argue it laid the groundwork for critical thinking. Others say it was just chaos with better grammar. You suspect it's both. You write your own scroll once, just a list of what's changed in the village over the past year. New births, new skills, new tools. You don't sign it. You hang it on the side of the guild hall. The next day, someone's added a joke about the goat that escaped the pen and joined morning prayers. By week's end, 5 people have added their own notes. It becomes a tradition, the wall of days. This is how culture happens, not with declarations or proclamations, with notes, with rumors, with jokes, drawings, half-songs hummed under breath. You're watching your town create its own narrative, not the one written in some dusty noble's ledger, but the one that matters, the one you all agree on, shape, share. And you see the hunger for more. People now wait eagerly when travelers arrive. They offer meals in exchange for stories. A boy named Alric begins sketching maps from what he hears, pinning them to the guild walls. He's never left the valley, but he knows every road for 50 miles in every direction. People call him the cartographer. He grins every time. You sit by the fire one night, rereading the scroll you bought from the newsbringer. It's crumpled now, smudged with ash, but the last line still makes you smile. In the absence of order, there is always song. You don't know who wrote that, but you know exactly what they meant. You toss another log on the fire and reach for your own quill, because maybe it's your turn to tell the story. You're staring at a coin, not because it's rare or shiny or cursed, though honestly, after everything, you wouldn't be surprised if it screamed when you touched it, but because it's new. Not just newly minted, but newly designed. On one side, the crest of the ruling house, still hanging on by blood and parchment. On the other, a plow, crossed with a hammer. Below that, the words, "For those who labor." You blink, turn it over again. Same coin, same message, and it hits you. The world's economy didn't just survive the plague, it mutated. You remember the early days? Money meant nothing when you couldn't eat it, wear it, or patch your roof with it. Gold was a joke, and bartering ruled everything. People traded buttons for bread, shoes for sheep, songs for shelter. A man once gave you a wheel of cheese for helping him dig a latrine. It was a good deal. But now coins are back, and they're different. Not just in design, but in what they represent. Power has shifted. Wealth, once locked in castles and cathedrals, is trickling down. Not evenly, not kindly, but it's moving. And people like you? You're no longer just part of the labor, you are the market. Here's your historical fact. After the Black Death, wages across Europe rose sharply. Labor shortages meant landowners had to compete for workers, and peasants found themselves, for the first time in living memory, able to negotiate. Serfdom began to crack. In some regions, it collapsed entirely. Feudal lords tried to enforce wage controls, often violently, but the genie was out of the bottle. The economy had shifted toward the working class, whether the elites liked it or not. And now you're living through the awkward, glorious, enraging birth of a new class, the freelancer. It starts with the bricklayers. 2 years ago, they were the lowest of the low, covered in dust, half-starved, paid in crusts and curses. Now, they've formed a crew, set their own prices, and refused jobs they don't like. A merchant tried to underpay them last week. They walked off mid-wall. The merchant ended up finishing it himself, badly. It collapsed 2 days later. No one's made that mistake since. You're seeing this everywhere. The weavers have unionized, though they don't call it that. The bakers won't rise before dawn unless compensated with extra flour and a hot meal. Even the shepherds hold weekly meetings now, sharing pasture routes and refusing to work for landowners who mistreat their dogs. And here's your fringe fact. In some places, workers began carrying tally sticks, wooden tokens carved with the symbols of their trade and the number of jobs completed. It wasn't official currency, but it held value, especially when backed by a group. You find one in a trader's pocket, 5 notches, each ending in a goat's hoof. You ask what it means. He says, "I fixed 5 fences. I'm owed 5 favors. You want 1. You carve your own. But it's not just about work. It's about ownership. You helped build a house last month for a woman who lost her entire family. She paid you in beeswax and strong ale, and when it was done, she carved both your names into the beam above the door. It's yours too," she said. You didn't argue. Because suddenly, ownership feels possible. Property isn't just inherited now, it's earned, swapped, negotiated. Land is changing hands in ways no lord can fully track. Some peasants lease it, some squat, some buy it outright with pooled savings. In a nearby village, the entire community bought their fields from a bankrupt noble. They run it as a collective. You hear rumors the king's advisors want to crush them. Good luck with that. Still, not everything's sunshine and silver. There's resistance. The old lords aren't going quietly. New taxes crop up every month, grain levies, road tolls. Survivors' fees. You get a visit from a steward demanding payment for the land your cottage now sits on. You ask for the name of the owner. He hesitates. You stare him down. He leaves without collecting a coin. But the anxiety lingers. There's a scholarly debate now about what exactly the post-plague economy created. Some say it led to the rise of capitalism, a shift from fixed feudal obligations to wage labor and open markets. Others argue it was just a blip, a desperate scramble for structure before the next wave of consolidation. You don't know which camp you fall into. You just know the rules are different now, and if you don't adapt, you'll be swallowed. So you adapt. You learn to haggle, you learn to say no, you learn how much your time is worth, and then you charge more than that, because you're alive, and that counts for something. You help Mare repair her tool shed, and she gives you half a sack of barley, a pair of gloves, and a promise that she'll teach you how to shoe a horse. It's the most lucrative deal you've ever made. You start keeping a ledger, just scraps, really. Who owes what when the milk dries up? How much the fur trader offered you for that half-finished comb. It feels like nonsense at first, but then you notice patterns, trends. Prices rise after rain. Certain traders lie more on Wednesdays. You underline that note 3 times. Soon, others ask you for advice. You've somehow become a merchant, or at least merchant adjacent. You meet a man who makes nothing, grows nothing, and sells only information. Gossip, trade news, market predictions. You call him useless. Then he tells you exactly when and where you can double your goat cheese profit. You double it. You apologize. Here's the thing about surviving a catastrophe. It teaches you what matters. And what matters now is trade, value, labor, fairness. It's messy, but it's moving. The economy didn't fall apart. It fell sideways. And now you're building it again, one deal at a time. One afternoon, you stand in the square and buy a painted bowl from a boy barely 12. It's ugly, lumpy, glazed in a color that can only be described as sickly moss. But when you ask how much, he smiles and says, 1 coin, or a good story. You tell him about the dancing skeletons painted on the abbey wall in a town 3 valleys over. He gives you the bowl. You both grin. That's the economy now, built on skill, on stories, on survival, on the kind of value that can't always be weighed. You still have that coin in your pocket, the one with the plow and the hammer. You press your thumb to it, and for once, it feels like it belongs to you. You're kneeling in the garden, dirt under your nails, breath fogging in the crisp morning air, and thinking about time. Not time in the abstract, clocks and calendars and whatever shape monks use to chart the heavens, but the lived kind, the rhythm of things, the before and after, the long sweep between what was lost and what's starting to grow again. You press your hands into the earth and feel how stubborn it still is, how alive. You didn't plant this garden. You inherited it, accidentally, when the original owner never came back. But now, it's yours. A memory garden, someone called it. Not because it remembers for you, but because you can't stop remembering while you're in it. There's that patch of time a neighbor used to tend, before his lungs gave out. There's the pear tree someone tried to graft before the blight, now hanging on with all the grace of a limping goat. And the row of carrots? Those were started by children, small fingers in cold soil, giggling about worms and ghosts. It's not a perfect garden, but it's feeding you. And more importantly, it's anchoring you. No, because here's what no one warned you about surviving a plague. After the danger passes, you have to relearn how to live with time. Not just endure it, use it, shape it, keep going, even when every season reminds you of what or who isn't here. Here's your historical fact. After the Black Death, Europe's relationship to time subtly shifted. With so many lives cut short, the sense of daily urgency intensified. But at the same time, the structure of time itself changed. Labor patterns adjusted to new wages, religious observance evolved, and people began tracking life not just by holy days or noble decrees, but by personal seasons, births, deaths, harvests, and shared memory. And now you're part of that rhythm. You wake with the sun, not because you have to, but because you want to. Morning is no longer a punishment. It's a gift. The quiet, golden hour where breath feels easiest and the world hasn't yet remembered to hurt you. Midday is for noise, for trading, teaching, cleaning tools, sharing meals. Evening is for stories, laughter if you can find it, silence if you can't. But always, always, the thread of memory winds through it all. There's a fringe fact that makes you smile, even if it's only a whisper in some books. In the decades after the plague, people began commemorating more. Not just the saints or kings, ordinary people. Families started marking the anniversary of deaths. Guilds held feasts in honor of members who'd passed. Some towns even hosted days of forgetting. Strange, bittersweet festivals where people wore masks and celebrated not knowing what came before. You think about throwing one of those. But then again, you do want to remember. You carve small signs for the garden beds, not just the names of the herbs or vegetables, but the names of the people who once planted them. Agnes's parsley, Nico's fennel, the twins' beans. Visitors ask who they were, and you tell them. Not just their deaths, but their lives. The song Agnes hummed when she cooked. The way Nico always wore his shoes backward. How the twins used to fake being ghosts to scare the priest. The past doesn't live behind you anymore. It grows beside you. There's a scholarly debate, because of course there is, about whether post-plague societies became more nostalgic or more future-focused. Some historians say survivors clung to memory out of trauma. Others argue they were too busy moving forward to look back. You think both are true, you live both. You remember and plant in the same breath. The garden becomes something else in time. A place people visit not just for food, but for grounding. Ely brings children to teach them how to plant garlic. Rosa starts a seed exchange, trading parsley for turnips, cabbage for calendula. A quiet boy named Tomas creates a small sundial and places it on a stone near the edge of the garden. So we know when it's time to tell stories, he says. He's 8. You sit by that sundial often. Sometimes you think of the worst days, those hollow, gray months when time stretched like cold dough and no one had the heart to mark it. Sometimes you remember the first night someone sang again, or the morning a neighbor shared a bowl of milk because he had too much. Sometimes you just breathe, and that's enough. You've started keeping a calendar, not one of those grand, celestial ones based on equinoxes and papal decrees. Yours is smaller, earthier. It's just a wall of your cottage with tally marks scratched into wood and occasional notes like, "Goose laid 3 eggs." Mare's laughter sounded like herself again. First frost, save the beets. It's not meant for anyone else. But one day, someone will see it. And maybe they'll understand what it was like to live after. Because that's what this whole village is doing now. Not just surviving the plague, but surviving survival. Making peace with time, with memory, with the fact that there are no neat endings. Just days that come and days that go, and the fragile, stubborn beauty of choosing to keep going. One morning, you find something new in the garden. A tiny sprout, thin as thread, green as spring, in a corner you haven't planted in. You don't know what it is. You didn't put it there. You think maybe it came from the wind, or a bird, or the hand of someone you once loved who's still watching out for you in a way that makes no sense and every kind of sense. You kneel, you touch it gently, you decide to let it grow. You're standing at the edge of the village watching the road, not waiting for someone in particular. At least, not anymore, but just watching. It's a habit now. Something you do when the day winds down and the sun spills gold across the fields. The road curves east, toward towns you've never seen, cities you've only heard about in songs, and mountains that sit like ancient gods beyond the horizon. Every so often, someone walks it. A trader, a family with a cart, a messenger with boots worn thin. And when they pass, they always ask the same thing. What happened here? And you always smile because you're not sure they'd believe it if you told them. You survived a plague. That's the easy part of the story. That's the headline. But what came after, that quiet, grinding, absurd, miraculous after, that's where the real story lives. Not in the dying, but in the rebuilding, in the mess of it, the bravery, the arguments, the jokes made over shallow graves, the weddings held in abandoned barns, the art scratched into walls and the ink-stained fingers of new readers who thought they'd never learn. Your village, your people, your stubborn, scrappy, half-wild little corner of the world, it's changed. Not just in the ways you can see, like new buildings or cleaner streets, but in the way people carry themselves now, with more certainty, more curiosity, more bite. There's a boy who builds windmills from scraps of wood. He doesn't know they shouldn't work, so they do. There's a woman who writes poems no one pays her for, and yet she fills an entire wall of her cottage with them anyway. A girl who teaches dogs to herd geese. A man who brews a new kind of beer and names each barrel after a lost friend. A child who knows what quarantine means and uses it in a game of pretend. There's no king overseeing it, no church dictating it, no law commanding it. It's just happening. People trying things, failing, trying again. You included. Here's your historical fact. In the decades following the Black Death, the foundations of Europe began to shift in subtle but irreversible ways. Feudal bonds weakened, cities grew bolder, new social contracts emerged. It wasn't revolution in the modern sense, but it was a rebalancing, a slow, collective decision to imagine life differently. Some of those shifts sparked centuries of change, others flickered and vanished. But for a while, the survivors held the pen. And that's what you've been doing all along, writing your own future. It's not perfect. Don't let anyone romanticize it. There's still cruelty, still hunger, still power games and bitter winters and crops that fail just when you thought they'd thrive. But there's also laughter again. There's music. There are stubborn green things growing in places you thought were permanently dead. The road in front of you isn't empty anymore. It's full of people moving forward, some walking toward you, some walking away, some limping, some dancing, but all moving. Here's your fringe fact. In some places, memorial stones were erected, not for kings or saints, but for entire communities that survived. Some were nothing more than rocks with initials. Others were elaborately carved, hidden in the backs of churches or under moss in forgotten fields. They weren't about bragging. They were about remembering, not just the dead, but the living, the ones who rebuilt. You start planning one for your village. Nothing fancy. A stone near the garden etched with names, symbols, maybe even a few lines of Ely's shaky poetry. You ask around, and people begin handing you scraps of what they want included. A verse, a recipe, a list of tools. One man just hands you a pebble, says it was in his pocket the whole time. There's a scholarly debate still smoldering among historians. Was the post-plague transformation intentional or accidental? Did survivors actively reshape their world, or were they simply reacting to a shattered one? You think about that often, whether your choices were choices or just instincts. You decide it doesn't matter. What matters is you're still here. You look back at your village. The roofs are patchy but strong. Smoke curls from chimneys. Someone is singing. Someone else is yelling at a goat. A child runs by with a stick, pretending it's a sword. You smile. You go inside and light the small lamp on your desk. Your fingers ache, but you pick up the quill anyway. Because the story isn't finished. Not yet. You write, "We were not spared, but we remained. We were not whole, but we endured. We were not the same, but we built something new." And you keep going, word after word, breath after breath, through the soft scrape of the pen and the creak of the old floor and the whisper of wind that always seems to carry the past in it, but never stays long enough to make you forget what you still have to do. Because there's always more to do, more to build, more to heal, more to remember, more to live. So now here you are, blanket pulled up, head heavy and eyes blinking slow. You've walked through a century of aftermath tonight, from the aching stillness that followed death to the clumsy, beautiful rebirth that grew in its shadow. You've seen how the world didn't end. Not really. it cracked open, and from those broken places came laughter, and song, and hammers striking stone, and ink scratching paper, and hands planting seeds in soil they were never meant to own. Maybe what the Black Death really did, in the end, was break the illusion of permanence. It reminded people, painfully, ruthlessly, that everything changes. And yet, you saw how the ones who stayed didn't just mourn, they acted, not in grand theatrical ways, but in daily decisions. A widow fixing her own roof, a boy teaching his sister to read, a healer saying, "Let's try this instead." You followed those quiet rebellions, those invisible revolutions, and if tonight's journey showed you anything, it's this. Survival isn't just a heartbeat. It's the refusal to stop becoming. So rest now. The road behind us is long and well-traveled, paved with grief and grit, and the soft footprints of people who decided to live anyway. Their stories are planted like gardens. They grow without asking your permission. And you? You're part of that too, whether you meant to be or not. The questions you carry, the stories you pass on, the way you remember, the world is shaped by all of it. So close your eyes, breathe deep, and when you wake, know this. Someone before you faced the darkness, and they didn't turn away. They rebuilt everything.